Today's guest is Raja Abdulhaq. He's a Palestinian American from Tul Karam in Palestine and has been an important part of the Palestine movement in America.
We, as oppressed people, have the right from our hearts and our freedom and our liberty that we will live and resist.
Traveling the country to different universities and masjids, educating about the plight of the Palestinian people, the evils of Zionism, and how to effectively fight for human rights. He co-founded Quds News Network, a massive online platform and media channel that has been raising awareness about the occupation of Palestine for over 10 years now. They have millions of followers on both their English and Arabic channels and have continued to grow despite the censorship and deplatforming efforts of Meta and YouTube. But his work isn't just limited to Palestine activism. As part of the Majlis al-Shura, otherwise known as the Islamic Leadership Council, he's helped to lead, organize, and uplift the Muslim community by helping to oversee and represent over 90 mosques and organizations in New York City. Now, for some of you, you may not be familiar with Raja as he keeps a low profile and isn't interested in growing his personal brand. But his contributions to the movement through media, leadership, and activism have been crucial to the progress of our communities here in America. We sat down and spoke about recent events in Gaza, the Middle East, Trump's ethnic cleansing proposal, and Zionist influence in America. I've had several podcasts go on for a few hours, but this one was the longest and easily one of my favorite discussions. Raja is just incredibly knowledgeable, so I'm certain you all will benefit tremendously from this discussion. After the podcast, we took him to a friend's house for dinner where we enjoyed some homemade kanafa.
Trying to watch the sugar, maybe.
Perfect, not good.
Now, before we hop into this episode, I just want to update you all about a few changes we're going to make to this channel. While this episode is currently uploaded here on our main channel, we are planning to migrate all podcast episodes to our new channel, Podcast & Co., which will be specifically for podcast episodes and nothing else. The reason for this change is because our content is diverse and has produced way too much clutter on this channel. It negatively affects the algorithm and it confuses some of our new subscribers that struggle to get a sense of what kind of content we produce. So please do help us grow this new channel by subscribing to it. The link to that channel is below in the description. Also, if you'd like to support our work and see behind the scenes content with guests like Raja, Scott Ritter, Daniel Hakikachu, and many others, become a member on our website, propandco.com. This helps us survive censorship and deplatforming and also just supports our channel. When you become a member, you gain access to behind the scenes footage exclusive to the website and gain early access to short films and documentaries before everyone else. So I hope you'll consider becoming a member. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this podcast discussion with Raja Abdulhaq. You guys were removed from Meta, weren't you?
Yeah, we were removed and we brought it back, and then we're kind of now unpublished because we don't want to risk losing the page. The page has, I can freely say, millions of posts of news, and the archive that we have is significant. Archive of photos and images, that's something that most news outlets don't even have access to because we have access to the average person. So we have that still, but most of our work has moved towards Telegram and Twitter for the time being. So yeah, that's kind of the story, but until now we have...
And you post in both English and Arabic.
Yes. The Arabic version, we started it in... I'm trying to remember the exact year. Maybe 2014.
So it came after the
like
English version.
Yeah, a few years after. Our main focus was on the Arabic side. Then I created the English site and started, recruiting different people around the world, like mostly people who speak. The biggest problem with the Palestinian narrative has always been that we talk about Palestine with Arabic language, but we translate it to English. And that most of the times creates problems because many things you say overseas is not the same thing we say here. So a lot of people cannot relate, and it feels like just a translation. So I wanted to change that into, no, let's create an English first speaking page and an outlet that, of course, we translate the local news and we have the same network of journalists, but also have people from within the West who are pro-Palestine and can talk about the...
And you guys have a website?
We have a website now.
So you
But
post
what we have
articles and
today is-
blogs there, or
What is it?
you post articles, blogs? Do you do videos?
We don't mostly do in Arabic site. It's most like it's not as on the same level as the Arabic for lack of funding and lack of resources. But like the English version is mostly focused on news more than anything. Sometimes we get a couple of articles here and there, but the majority of our work is mostly news. Yeah.
And do you guys produce for a YouTube channel, anything like that?
We do, yes. But our YouTube channels also have been completely
Suppressed, shadow banned. Yeah.
shadow banned completely. Our YouTube channel has I think 2 million followers or subscribers, and most of our videos get like 1,000 to 2,000 views, which is insane. Like if you have 2 million subscriber channels, you should be getting tens of thousands of views.
Yeah, at a minimum.
But we barely get anything because clearly our channel is shadow banned 100%.
And these channels exist, are they separate for both English and Arabic?
Yeah, we have different ones. We have, even in Arabic, we have ones that are designated to focus on Palestinian prisoners, one mostly just about Palestine in general. And at different points of our history, we had different channels also like tackling like social issues at the same time in Palestine. But until now, like the most dominant one is just the major one, the global one that does all of the politics.
So most media brands, channels, they have like their own ideology or perspective that they lean in and that they try to propagate out. So what guides Quds News Network? Is it simply just news centered around Palestinian liberation, or is it, pan-Arab? Like, what is the driving ideology or vision behind the brand?
That's actually a great question, because I think what made us unique since we launched was the idea that we are not just look, and this is one problem that we have in the Arab world and even in the West, specifically within the Muslim and Arab communities at large, is that we think that journalism, because we are lied to by Western propaganda, that journalism is supposed to be objective, right? It's supposed to be, in the middle, not taking sides. But as we know, like I think in the past 15 months, nobody is fooled by Western media and Western journalism, that nothing is objective and everything is based on propaganda to support the empires and their political powers. For us, from the very beginning, we said we're not going to be quote unquote objective, because we don't believe that journalism is truly objective. We are going to be advocates of the Palestinian cause, and we are in line with the resistance. What we mean by that is that we are journalists who are covering the cause of Palestine, but we also have an objective, which is to liberate Palestine, and that means we are happy. I don't want to say the word happy. We are aligned with the national. What's the right word here? With the national methodology of liberation. Whatever Palestinians in general choose to use to be able to fight for themselves and liberate their lands, we are in alignment with them, because that's our identity. We are Palestinian journalists, so we are Palestinians first, and that means that whatever is good for the cause is good for us, and that's our objective and that's our message. We did not lie. We did not try to lie ourselves or to anybody else that we are, some kind of Western journalists that are coming to Palestine and talking about Palestine objectively. We do acknowledge that Israel is a settler colonial state that is our enemy, the enemy of Palestinians, and when we are writing our news stories, that's the narrative and that's the editorial policy that we follow. We also follow editorial policy that resistance is the right of the Palestinians, and they have every right to resist and to be able to liberate themselves. And that has been our editorial policy since we began. And I think that what has been unique about Quds is that this is who we are and we take pride in it. And that's why a lot of people trust us, because we also don't like to post things quickly for the sake of, winning the breaking news, war. Especially in the past 15 months, there has been a lot of propaganda and psychological warfare that was being produced by Israel, right, to shake in the people of Gaza. We don't post everything. We ask ourselves before we post anything, does this serve Israel, or is it a part of a psychological warfare, or is it truly just a news that we need to report? And if we feel that whatever news is being fed to us is something that might harm the Palestinian cause, we either don't report it if it's not relevant, or we report it but we contextualize it. We bring in a context to it so people know that this might be part of a psychological warfare against Gaza. We talk about and this is something that is missing overall from the mainstream, pro-Palestinian activist circles and journalism and media. We don't just focus on the pains and horror stories of our people. We actually focus on the stories of resilience. We focus on the stories of resistance. We focus on the stories of strength. We focus on the stories of people stand up to occupation, stand up for their rights. We don't just want to show our people as victims. Yes, we are victims to settler colonial project and occupation, but we're also people who have pride and believe in our human dignity, and we want to struggle for our freedom. So we want to show that side as well. And that's also why a lot of times we got a suppression by Meta and YouTube and whatnot, because we don't want to continue to just report as victims and that's it, because we feel that eventually that normalize the idea that Palestinians just have to live as victims and not to do anything about it.
So what sort of content do you guys post to YouTube? Do you guys have a reporter who reports as if it's like Al Jazeera, or is it citizen journalist content from random contributors?
We do many things, many multimedia stuff. We do reporters, we do podcasts, we do interviews, we do just basic videos with some texts explaining. Back in the day when video used to be what algorithm preferred on Facebook, if you remember those days, we used to produce a lot of like fast-paced like videos like AJ Plus and
AJ Plus, like
all
the
of
1 minute explainer with text change.
Exactly. We did a lot of those, and those did really well back in the day. It was like the big thing, and everybody, like companies were created just for this, like, and media companies specifically. But video, the problem with video, as you know more than anybody else, it's very hard to produce. It takes time. It's expensive. And we have a major problem in the West Bank is that, Israel is there stopping and sabotaging stuff. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority are also not very helpful. They're actually fighting anybody who's in favor of the resistance. So a lot of times video is a weakling for sure. So we mostly focus on reporting the news on the website itself by providing, opinions and articles and summaries and investigations, but our videos ranges, but yeah, video has always been something that always evolves, and we change by whatever works.
Do you guys have a studio here in the US?
No, most of the work is overseas. Nothing is done here. Even myself, like I get to the pay. I have not been doing like day-to-day stuff in years now. Back in the day, I used to stay up at night and post stuff and connect with people and write stuff and manage the website, but I don't do that anymore. I can't. Like now we have better suited people that can do this as part of their job.
So obviously after October 7th, like you said, you guys were deplatformed off Meta. On YouTube, you're shadow banned. You're probably not even monetized on YouTube.
Yeah.
But so it kind of forces you to engage in like a level of self-censorship. You want to remain on the platform, so you have to start abiding by the rules that you think they have, because the rules are constantly changing. With the Trump administration now and the Zionists, changing the definition of anti-Semitism, broadening it in order to include, critiques of Zionism or even just critiques of what Israel's objectively doing.
Yeah.
Are you worried that you guys are going to not just be shut down, but that they'll come after you? Because that's something that I wonder, for example, they talked about removing the 501c3 status of certain organizations. So even Masajid, if they're involved in, like, if they're just a place where people meet in order to get on buses and go to protest, then they'll say, oh, you're getting involved in pro-Hamas terrorist rallies, therefore we have to remove your 501c3 status. So I'm worried they're going to play these kinds of games. Are you worried that maybe this might happen to Quds News Network?
I'm not worried about it, because all of our infrastructure is overseas. I'm the only connection with the network here in the U.S., and I don't even have a day-to-day responsibilities. We don't have anything registered in the U.S. We did consider it back in the day, because the Palestinian Authority used to crack down on Palestinian journalists who cover in a specific angle, but we've never registered any corporation in the U.S. Nothing exists in the U.S., so there's nothing to worry about there in that regard from a logistical perspective. But in terms of like media and censorship, I mean, I don't know if it's going to get worse than this. Like our Facebook page is completely off. Our Instagram is constantly harassed and suppressed, and stuff being deleted left and right. Even on Twitter, same thing. We have the same problem. Our YouTube is completely shadow banned right now. There's many ideas of maybe starting over and create brand new pages, but eventually it's risky because we have 2 million subscribers and it took us maybe a decade to build that. For you to move past that and create something new that eventually you might know it might get shadow banned again. But I think in general, the level of specifically the Arabic side, which is the most famous one, prominent one for us, it's mostly catering for the Arab world or for the Palestinian community. So the messaging is completely different than the US. Even though sometimes literally showing pictures of like resistance fighters in Gaza when you report the news, that sometimes gets flagged and gets removed, even though you're literally just reporting the news. So it makes it hard to post, sometimes to report the news. And this is why most people now have moved towards Telegram, because there's no censorship there. The problem with Telegram, as you know, is that people have to take time out of their day to actually log into Telegram and check your channel and go through the list of things, versus being conveniently placed in the social media platforms that people visit on a daily basis, and then you pop up in their face. You lose a big leverage there. But in terms of censorship, I don't think that Trump is gonna make it worse than it already is. I think Israel and the censorship about Israel is, as we know in the US, it's not just exclusive to the Republicans. I mean, the genocide was done by a Democrat president, so I don't think it's going to get worse in that regard.
I remember early on after October 7th, I saw Quds News Network everywhere. It was all over my feed, but you guys have completely disappeared from the X algorithm. I don't know, have you guys stopped posting, or are you guys actually shadow banned?
It's definitely the latter. I think it's everywhere we go now. We've been shadow banned. Like Quds News Network at the very beginning, and also like the algorithm of X or Twitter. It's like very weird. Sometimes it pops things, and sometimes it suppresses things. But we still post on Twitter nonstop. It's just that it doesn't get much views or exposure on the algorithm. So I'm assuming there's some kind of shadow ban for sure.
So how many staff members do you guys have, or volunteers? Like, how large is this network of reporters on both the English and Arabic side? And then also, how do you guys go about collecting information and sifting through it and verifying it in an efficient amount of time and then post it?
Unfortunately, I can't go through the details of that for obvious reasons, because most of our people live in the West Bank or neighboring countries, and as we know, it's been Israel and Palestinian Authority specifically have been trying to crack down on this network for a while. They've put some journalists in the West Bank in jail because of working with us. But what I can say is that we're in a good place professionally, that we have professional journalists and and people who staff who are like actually trying to do media in a professional way. But that's kind of the most I can do. Unfortunately, you're familiar with the situation overseas. It's hard to talk about these things because
I understand.
It puts some people's lives in jeopardy.
Yeah. Well, I ask because I'm curious about this concept of citizen journalism. That's what X, the platform, is really supposed to be about. And the largest accounts are usually the accounts that basically try to be first. They don't care if it's verified or not. And they post anything and everything. And they either follow other people who do the same thing and they scrape it. They use bots. They're in Telegram, and they just grab as much information as possible. They use Google alerts, and they just post constantly over and over and over and over again. But because of that, there's a lot of, excuse my language, but bullshit. It's just garbage information, straight up propaganda, complete lies. It's so easy for the government propagandists to basically insert, their narrative, a completely fake narrative, and just have it go ballistic and go viral. And then you find out 2-3 days later, when it doesn't even matter anymore because people have moved on to the next 10 subjects. Yes. And you find out that this is completely false.
100%. This is a major problem. I think as a network, we've moved past the citizen journalist model a long time ago. For obvious reasons. I think when social media first came out, people were excited to share the news and do things and just, connect and be part of a network that talks about, what's happening on the ground. Many years after that, people start realizing that, now I have the ability to create my own network. Why would I help somebody else? So this is why we had like a rise of so many different Palestinian networks that, came about. Of course, unfortunately, I mean, I don't want to say unfortunately or fortunately, lots of them were, went out of business because they couldn't keep up. Like a one-man show, 2 people is not enough. What made it work for Quds News Network is that we institutionalized the work, and we had a couple of great people who are committed and constantly work to make this a success. We have a couple of people that are leading the efforts that are working around the clock. So amazing people. The phenomena that you mentioned is really dangerous and harmful. In Twitter, specifically on X, as you mentioned, there are a couple of anonymous people that we don't know who they are. They have these anonymous names, fake names, pseudo-names on Twitter that are constantly posting things that most of the time, by the way, they steal it from pages like Quds News Network. They take this from our telegrams, as you mentioned, and they just repackage them and they just post them quickly. Or sometimes they post, and we've seen this throughout the last 16 or 15 months, just take any footage from anywhere and just throw any kind of fake story on it just to get followers and to become first. That model is very dangerous because even though, as you mentioned, it gets corrected in a day or 2, but what it does, the long-term ramifications of it on people's consciousness is very dangerous, because the people who don't see the correction, and as you know, algorithm sometimes favors the drama, but it doesn't favor the correction of the drama. The people who see the drama, they don't see the correction, and it just gets burnt into their consciousness, in their subconsciousness, is that news is true, and they will never know that it's false. And years down the line, they start making assessments and analysis and understand the world through the lens of fake stories, of fake analysis that will eventually mess up their, I don't want to say perception of reality, but their perception of events around them. They start believing in things that are not true. And conspiracy theories are, honestly speaking, it's one of the biggest issues we have as Muslims or people who are against like Western colonialism and imperialism. Believing in these conspiracy theories are extremely dangerous, because it makes us focus on the wrong thing. And if you focus on the wrong thing, you will never be able to end and stop the real thing. So these pages on Twitter are extremely problematic. I don't know what can be done about it, but as you know, like every couple of months, there's a new pseudonym that comes out of nowhere now and starts sharing things, and it becomes the most famous one. But it's definitely problematic and dangerous for the long term.
Yeah, X in general. So Elon Musk has removed links. Obviously, you can still post links, but it's in the algorithm, and he's also commented on it as well. If you include a link to a video, to an article, to a source, then they suppress that post. Yeah. They want to keep people in X, getting their news from X. So now you're discouraged from posting a link, which means you're discouraged from posting sources, which means now people are accustomed to, I got this information from an account I follow. And they've provided, they didn't even include a picture. They just said, this happened in this way, at this place, at this time, and this is who's responsible for it. And that's it. That's the truth to them. And I think there's also an element of people wanting to believe something. Like if you're a Zionist, it's not going to be hard to convince you of some lie. You want to believe the Palestinians are so evil and terrible and horrible. Like for example, yesterday, all over social media, people are talking about, what's her first name? Is it Shira? The mother of the 2 babies. They determine that potentially it's the wrong body, that it's not her body. But for the babies, they did an autopsy within a couple of hours, and they're like, we have reason to believe that they were brutally murdered in this way with, Hamas's bare hands. You can't know that. There's no such thing. And no coroner has ever done a report where they describe something as brutally murdered. Like, it's propagandized language, and there's no official source for it, but it spread like wildfire, and everyone spread it, and that's it. They'll never care about the information that comes afterwards, and because they want to believe it, that they are going to believe it, and that's the truth to them. So it's definitely problematic. So I want to hop in now to this list of questions I have for you.
Sure.
So you wrote an article for Middle East Eye, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. You discussed how Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza threatens the survival of the Egyptian and Jordanian regimes. Can you clarify why that is?
Yeah, sure. Just to give a little bit of context, and I think it's important here, is that to truly understand the importance of the Jordanian and the Egyptian regimes to the U.S. empire, and I want people to think about things from the context of the interests of the U.S. and not just Trump. Because at the end of the day, yeah, I know it's easy to just blame Trump and make Trump as the one-man show. But as a big empire like the U.S., the biggest empire on the face of Earth, I don't think there has been any empire in the history of mankind has been as powerful as the U.S. So we can't just claim that one man who got elected and now he stole the empire and he does whatever he wants with it. There's a bureaucracy. There's the establishment. There's the, as people like to call it, the deep state. There's institutions like the Pentagon and the CIA and the Department of Homeland Security and Department of State and whatnot. There's institutions that come up with policies and national interests and national security papers. There's professors in universities that produce content on annual basis explaining to the empire what to do about this problem and that problem. It's not like Trump wakes up one day and he decides, you know what, today I'm going to bomb Syria and tomorrow I'm going to bomb Palestine. Before he does any of that, the Pentagon has to assess the military capabilities. What's the response? How do we respond to the response of our response? How do we retaliate? What are the major forces there? Like it's a very complicated process. I mean, one of us, if you want to open a small business in a neighborhood, you would check about the demographics of the neighborhood. You do a business plan. You start assessing the real estate value. You do a lot of math to make sure that your investment, the return on your investment is going to be positive. So if you can do that, all of that research on a small scale of just running a business that will cost you $200,000, imagine an empire like the U.S. that controls the world and has over 700 or 800 military bases around the world. They calculate every single step they take. So we can't be naive to think that when Trump decides on something, that means that he's just a fool that he decides on something. Absolutely not. There's an empire and institutions behind him that supports him. And the biggest evidence of this is that Trump in the past few weeks has been saying nonsense about displacing Palestinians and threatening Jordan and Egypt that they must take the refugees or they must take the displaced people from Gaza, or the U.S. will stop its aid to them. Because, Egypt and Jordan, they're considered I think the top three or the top four of military and economic aid recipients of the U.S. They're considered the, allies. Even Jordan is considered to be, it's not part of the NATO, but they're considered to be of a strategic partner of the U.S. There's a specific label that Jordan has. The label escapes me now. Is
it a non-NATO ally?
It's a non-NATO. Yeah, exactly. But I'm not sure if there's another term. But it's a non-NATO ally. And Jordan receives, I think, the second most military aid from the U.S. after Ukraine. And you got to understand, Ukraine is just a recent war. So if you take Ukraine out of the equation, Jordan is the highest recipient of U.S. military aid in the world, or one of the top ones. And if memory doesn't serves me right, they're the highest in receiving military aid when it comes to, I think, military airplane support specifically. So besides that, them being labeled that, the history of Jordan since its beginning, since 1921, or what we know as the Transjordan Emirate, that started after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the collaboration between so-called Sharif Hussein with the British, and then in reward of him betraying the Ottoman Empire, they gave him Jordan, or what is known as the East River of Palestine, and it's called like the Transjordan Emirate. Since its beginning, the army was developed and was created by a British general. In the Jordan culture, he's called Gulab Pasha. John Glubb, but in Arabic they call him Glubb Basha, as like he's one of the bashas that came about and helped Jordan. So he's a guy that literally helped develop the Jordanian army from the very beginning. Of course, at the very beginning it was not called the Jordanian army; it was called like the Arab Ligan, and later on he created another faction that is called the Desert Squad, that mostly were made out of Bedouin militias, and the main reason for creating them was to support and help and protect the oil pipelines from Saudi, and to crack down on any people who threatened the British Empire in the region. And as a matter of fact, this Desert Squad was sent, or Desert Force was sent in Palestine in 1936 to crush the Arab revolt in Palestine. Imagine Jordanian Bedouins coming to Palestine to collaborate with the British colonialism to crush the Palestinian rebellion against the British colonization and against the settler colonial project of Zionism at that time. So Jordan, from the very beginning, was in alignment with the empires. Specifically, at the beginning was the British Empire. Later on, Jordan became very strategic to the U.S. Now, why is Jordan very important to the U.S.? Again, number one, Jordan was created in a sense specifically after 1948 as a way to absorb the West Bank and as a way for Jordan to become another home for Palestinians. Another instead of having Palestine as to be their home country, you create another state that can serve that purpose. So you take them, you absorb them into Jordan, and as we know, historically speaking, demographically speaking as well, Palestinians have been the majority in Jordan, not the Jordanians. The Jordanians have the control of the state, but the majority of the people, the population, were mostly Palestinians. So a lot of them were integrated into Jordan. And throughout history, also, Jordan has been following a process called Jordanization of Palestinians. Or in Arabic, we call it أردنة الفلسطينيين, meaning you're turning them into becoming Jordanians. And the best way to understand this is to look at America, the concept of assimilation, right? Every single immigrant that comes to the US, they have to go through so-called processes of integration, assimilation, so-called melting pot, right? You have to become American, the Americanization of the immigrants, right? And the whole concept is that you get rid of your, those are very classic assimilation theories in terms of any new immigrant has to get rid of their identities, their unique values, their unique worldviews, and accept the identity of the the host that within that state. So something happened to Palestinians in Jordan. They were pushed into feeling that you must become Jordanian. And if you don't become Jordanian, then you're not loyal to the state and you are a threat to the state. And of course, this got worse after Jordan signed the Wadi, the so-called peace agreement with Israel in 1994. And then when they signed that agreement, Jordan started pushing more a national motto of Jordan first, meaning that all of our strategies, all of our national interests, all of our national security have to be about Jordan first and not Palestine. Now, the reason why this is very pivotal is there's something in history that is known as the Black September, right? And that is the moment in the 70 and 71 when Palestinian factions used to be roaming in Jordan and Amman, and they were, attacking Israel from the east border. They had literally, Jordan was like a revolutionary pace for the Palestinian Liberation Organization and for PFLP and for Fatah. The majority of the Palestinian factions that used to exist in Jordan, and Jordan was a pace for them to attack Israel to liberate Palestine. So that was a major problem for the king at that time, King Hussein, and he needed excuses to get rid of them. And eventually, that was a fallout between him and Arafat and the PLO and the Palestinian movements at large, and he expelled them to Lebanon. Since that time, in 1971 until today, Jordan has been protecting the border of Israel on the east side. And that has been the most important investment for America and Israel in protecting Israeli borders, because Israeli borders on the east with Jordan are the largest one, right? There's 300 miles of border. So you have all of that land that is easily accessible from Jordan. Literally, you can literally walk from Jordan to Israel. Like it's that easy for you to start, if you want to do any ops. And the ops and operations and attacks in the 60s and the 70s are very evident. There was like hundreds of them. So that was a major problem for Israel. So now to bring it back to bringing in this historical context is important because we need to understand that, as I mentioned, Jordan was created as a way to absorb the refugees from Palestine into Jordan. And once you Jordanize them into becoming Jordanians, then they don't see themselves as refugees anymore, and they don't start thinking about the future that I need to go back home and then I need to rebel and attack Israel and engage in the resistance. Now I'm Jordanian, and because of the Jordan first slogan and the social pressure that is on me and I need to assimilate, then that means you don't only absorb Palestinians, but you are de-radicalizing Palestinians by making them not think about resistance and not think about liberation and just think about the usual things you think about, like raising a family and living your life in Jordan and be happy that Jordan provided you security and stability. So you're killing two birds in one stone. You get rid of the Palestinians from after the expulsion of 1948. You send them to Jordan, and then they get normalized and assimilated into becoming carrying a new identity. In addition to that, as I mentioned, the third component is the protecting the border. And all of this that I mentioned is important in protecting the border, because when you say that Jordan first, we need to care about Jordan initially, then you need to protect the borders, because if you allow Palestinians to attack Israel from the border, then Israel will retaliate against Jordan, and then you jeopardize the Jordanian stability and security. So using those mechanisms and these policies that Jordan has been, invoking in are essential in protecting Israeli eastern borders. And because of that, of course, as I mentioned, Israel has been able to focus its resources on Lebanon and on Gaza, because all of their eastern border is protected. So there's nothing to worry about there. Jordan will do their job for them for free. And then they focus on Lebanon and in Gaza. And they've been shifting towards Gaza, and we can talk about Gaza in a bit. So Jordan has that major component in protecting Israeli security through the different means that I just mentioned. But also Jordan is important in America's war against quote-unquote terrorism in Iraq. They were engaged not just by sending forces in Iraq, but they provide an Arab legitimacy to the war. They are in the borders with Iraq, so they're able to protect the borders and keep the so-called terrorists at bay within Iraq itself. They are borders with Syria as well. So Jordan is strategic to the U.S., strategic in protecting the pipelines, the oil pipelines that comes out of the Saudi. So Jordan is very important, and so America doesn't want to lose Jordan, because if they lose Jordan and Jordan becomes destabilized, then it becomes a major problem for them. It will become like an Iraq 2.0, right? Because you have a region that is very strategic, is very on the borders of Israel. If it's not stable, then the majority of the people, the first thing they want to do is they want to attack Israel. So making or keeping Jordan stable is existential to American interest in the region. So Trump can say whatever he wants, but lately, as I mentioned, he's been backtracking all of this nonsense, right? As you see after the embarrassing interview with King Abdullah, the second day, Trump recorded the video and shared it on the White House social media, speaking highly of Jordan, speaking highly of the king. And he has never done this about anybody else.
To the great people of Jordan, you're a spectacular group. I have to tell you, you're very, very fantastic people with tremendous brilliance and energy. I want to just say that you have a king who is a tremendous man. He's a leader. He's got a wonderful heart. He loves you so much. He loves his country. He's done amazingly. King Abdullah is one of the true great leaders of the world. And I just want to tell you, you're lucky to have him. And I say that from my heart. You are very, very lucky to have him.
Why would Trump, the narcissist guy, come out a day after embarrassing someone and, providing a no apology? He didn't, of course, apologize, but it was obvious what was happening. It was to save the face of the King of Abdullah, because he was humiliated, but most importantly, it made people question the king and the regime and their usefulness to American empire. So America doesn't want to lose that. Now, same thing with Egypt. Egypt, specifically after the Camp David in 1978, Egypt has jumped ship from Russia or the Soviet Union to be in bed with America. And since then, they've been protecting the Israeli border, and that has been their job. But a major job that specifically Sisi has been doing since 2014 after the coup in Egypt has been to or the attempts to try to crush the resistance in Gaza. As I mentioned, Jordan allowed Israel to focus its work on Gaza. So what Israel did end up doing is, and the US of course, they went to Sisi, and I'm sure there was negotiations in the back door telling Sisi, we'll support you in the coup, but you need to crush and suffocate Gaza, because as we know, the blockade has been in place in Gaza since 2006, but the resistance is still powerful after 2008 war, 2014 war. So Israel was still worried about Hamas, specifically having tunnels, and it's very clear. It's very important to say that the tunnels were smuggling weapons, but also smuggling weapons, milk and food to the people of Gaza. So Sisi needed to crush the resistance in Gaza by suffocating the tunnels. And what he ended up doing, and this is very well known, he was not able to stop the tunnels, so he did something else. What he ended up doing is that the Egyptian city of Rafah, which is like a twin city in Egypt, it was the business of the city was based on tunnels. Literally, merchants there will bring in all kind of food and medication and bring in stuff to Gaza for people. It's literally, think of it like I don't want to say black market, but it's like a market between Egypt and Gaza, including weapons, of course, to come into Gaza. He literally destroyed that city. He went in something called the buffer zone between Gaza and Egypt, about 5 kilometers, all the way back to so-called protect Egypt from terrorism. But the real issue is that they cannot get to all the tunnels, so they would rather stop the distributors to sell stuff to Gaza. So even if Gaza has access to tunnels, nobody's selling them anything because nobody lives in Rafah anyways. So he did that way. He enabled Israel to suffocate Gaza. And because of that suffocation, as we all know, Hamas went in to start producing and manufacturing their own weapons. Before 2014, Hamas almost never manufactured anything with the exception of Qassam rockets. They used to smuggle weapons non-stop. But when they found themselves stuck and suffocated, there's nothing to smuggle anymore. And this is where they went into the concept of manufacturing. So again, I went through a lot of historical context to bring it back and say, America cannot risk losing the benefit of what Jordan and Egypt provide to America, specifically through protecting Israel and allowing Israel to literally exist. Because without Jordan and Egypt, Israel cannot keep up with the border attacks, cannot keep up with its politics, cannot keep up with the region refusing to normalize. There's so many things that we can talk about. The normalization coverage that Egypt and Jordan provides to Israel, the suppression of political dissent against American hegemony and against Israeli occupation in the region. But Jordan and Egypt, as I mentioned, historically speaking, has been pivotal to American hegemony in the region. And without them, America will lose a lot in the region. So I don't think the fantasies of Trump will supersede the needs and the interests of the empire. So I really think, based on what we've witnessed in the past couple of weeks and Trump backtracking, and even I think today or yesterday, he said that, well, his proposal about the displacement of Palestinians is only a proposal, and it's up to Jordanians and Egyptians to take it or not. So now, before he used to push for it, now he realized that Egypt and Jordan are pissed off and they're not going to accept it. And by the way, they're not accepting that plan not because they're good regimes, but because they know that will that will literally undermine their regimes politically and morally, and we can talk about in details if needed.
That's what I'd like. Yeah, so let's go into detail about how.
How is very simple. As I mentioned, Jordan in the past, let's say at least since the 60s, have been Jordanizing Palestinians in Jordan. And they get to the point where now they have successfully quote-unquote de-radicalized Palestinians, or they get to the point where Palestinians in Jordan now don't see armed resistance from Jordan as an option anymore, under the slogans and the motto of like Jordan first, and anything you do in Jordan will undermine Jordan's security. So why would you do anything that will undermine Jordan politically and from a security perspective? So imagine bringing in 1 million people from Gaza and throw them in Jordan. Now, besides all of the social economic problems that this will create for Jordan, and of course even the economic limitation and logistical limitation, but people of Gaza have been resisting for as far as we can remember. And even though Jordan thought that they have been successful in Jordanizing all of its citizens, in creating an identity of Jordanian above all of this will be undermined by bringing in 1 million people in Jordan. Jordan's population is what, like 11 million people? Bring in another 10% of people that will be not Jordanians from a political sense, right? Bringing them in your country, that will destabilize the country politically, because people of Gaza have their humanitarian need, they have their political aspirations, they're still connected with the land, they still see Palestine as their struggle. For Jordan to assimilate them into Jordan and Jordanize them will take them decades. It's gonna take generation after generation. And let's not forget that the events of the Black September in early 1970 and the issues, the clashes between Palestinian movements and the Jordanian government, that played a role into becoming like a shock doctrine for Palestinians in Jordan to take a step back and not engage, not to piss off the regime, because in their consciousness the regime now is pissed off because of the clashes with the PLO. Right now that baggage doesn't exist here anymore. And the best way to think about it is that Muslims who used to be in September 11, the older generation, they always look at themselves or feel an inferiority complex because they feel guilty because of September 11. So they have that baggage that come with them. But the younger Muslim generation in the US, they're not apologetic, right? They don't have that baggage that comes with them. They can't relate to September 11. So same thing, the people and the generations that exist in Jordan have that baggage, the baggage of the Black September. The people who come from Gaza have nothing to do with that. So to them, like, why would I respect so-called Jordanian identity above my own identity as a Palestinian? And again, by Jordanian identity, I mean from a political sense. I'm not talking about Jordanian people. This is very important distinction. So these people will eventually have their Palestinian identity, and they want to resist, and they want to start attacking Israel from the eastern border, and that will create problems for Jordan, because Jordan right now is so-called strategic partner for the U.S. They carry themselves as a stable country that welcomes refugees, and it's about peace and all of that nonsense, and they can't keep up with that. But what I think is this is from a logistical sense. From a moral perspective, Jordan since 1948 has been claiming that they are in favor of Palestine. They are in favor of so-called just solution, of course, two-state solution, normalizing crab. But at the end of the day, they have always been against the expulsion of Palestinians. For them to accept, and they have been building their legitimacy as someone who's a partner and a supporter to the Palestinian cause. For them to accept the displacement plans, then that means they are in bed with Trump and Netanyahu, and not just Israel, with the US. Because Trump and Netanyahu are an extra layer to people, as you know. Like, they see Trump and Netanyahu as like this, as if they're isolated from Israel and the US. So to them, what's the benefit of Jordan now if you're going to be conceding to displacement of Palestinians, to the technically, if you think about it, it's a liquidation of the Palestinian cause, right? If you get rid of all the people from Gaza and eventually from the West Bank, then you are partnering with the US and Israel to liquidate the Palestinian cause. No sane Jordanian, even, forget about Palestinians, like legitimate Jordanian, will be okay with that. And that will make them question the political legitimacy and the moral legitimacy of the King of Jordan and his regime. Because for the past 100 years, you've been claiming you're in favor of Palestine, against the Nakba, but now you're actually facilitating another Nakba. That will undermine them, and eventually there will be dissent against them, and that will tarnish, and eventually might lead to their political demise, 100%. Especially now with the changes in Libya, in Syria, and eventually, Jordan might become into like technically a place for Palestinian as a base for the Palestinian resistance, and that's not something that Jordan wants to do. Same thing can be said about Egypt and Sisi. Egypt to them, being and Mubarak played that game more than Sisi, which is the concept of trying to balance between the anger of my people versus me being pragmatic and doing things in order for him to stay in power. If Sisi compromises and allows 1 million people from Gaza to come to Egypt, he would have to deal with the same issues as Jordan. Yes, he doesn't have the problem of assimilation because Jordanians and Palestinians are very connected socially and from a social fabric perspective. Egyptians and Gazans, even though the Gazans are close, but they're completely separated. They're not the same as, for example, back in the day between the West Bank and Jordan. So there might not be a problem in terms of assimilation, but it would be the same problem with political legitimacy, with the moral legitimacy. And eventually, yes, these guys will still going to go to Sinai and they still want to attack Israel and still want to try to liberate their cause and fight for their cause. And that's going to bring in a lot of disability for Egypt. So with all of that being said, I truly don't believe that the U.S. or even Israel, right, are going to be risking these partners and these allies because of these fantasies. Now, it doesn't mean that Netanyahu and his people and Israel did not get to the point where they feel that they made a mistake in Nakba, that did not get rid of all Palestinians, because clearly until today, 76 years after the Nakba, Palestinians in Gaza are still resisting. But I'm sure he's worried about the stability of their allies and their borders more than they are about, their fantasies of displacing Palestinians. They might think
But are they really fantasies? Because right now, what you're describing for Jordan and Egypt is a situation in which they want to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is pretending that, one day we'll solve the Palestinian issue through two states. But we know that this is dead. It's been dead for a long time. And the cat is out the bag. If October 7th has done anything, it's revealed to the world what Israel's true nature is and what their true intentions are. And we're seeing it with, the murder of civilians and just, completely eradicating like the infrastructure of Gaza, like 95%, and committing genocide. We know that Israel wants to get rid of them. So these people have to go somewhere. So where are they going to go? So are they really fantasies? I mean, you don't think Netanyahu would legitimately, push these people into Jordan?
Look, I might be a little bit more pragmatic in my analysis than maybe some other people. Knowing if you study like the Zionist movement and you study Israeli history, you understand that these guys studied the Western colonial legacy and they are following the colonial archive step by step, literally from 1940 until today. Everything they do in counterinsurgency, in how they bomb our people, in terms of how they expel our people. I don't think Netanyahu and Israel in general, they will make any moves without it eventually being important and essential for the security of Israel and for them to make sure their settler colonial project is successful. Israel is not, as I mentioned before, Netanyahu. I know people like to differentiate between Netanyahu and Israel. Netanyahu might be this arrogant, piece of crap that people don't like. But the policies of Israel are the policies of Israel. They're not the policies of Netanyahu. Netanyahu is just the mouthpiece of Israel, and he happens to be the leader. Of course, he has weight, and he can maneuver and can move the country in a specific direction. But at the end of the day, Israel has institutions, colonial institutions that study how to subjugate the Palestinians, what strategies work, what policies don't work. The siege on Gaza for the past 17 years or 19 years is not random. It was studied. They learned it from history. Throughout history, the sieging of places is a very common thing. Population-centered counterinsurgency, destroying the houses of the fighters who attack Israel. It's a very common old strategy that Israel does in order for the people of the family of the fighters to, number one, to stop, to stand against resistance, but most importantly, to tell the youth that in the future, if you do any operation against us, you're risking your family and you're leaving your family and we're going to destroy their houses, so you might as well not do anything. All of this is strategy. It's not done out of revenge. Even the war in Gaza. You mentioned this earlier in our conversation about like the propaganda that Israel does, specifically like the beheading of 40 babies and the mass raping women and all of that nonsense. These stories were mentioned in a sense of as a populist way to rally the people, specifically Western folks and like even Israelis themselves. But at the end of the day, everything Israel did in Gaza was strategic. It was not based, of course, revenge and avenge and retaliation, and them showing their the barbaric nature in them as Zionists, in terms of like the way they were not just killing our people, but they were having fun with it, and people were proposing to their girlfriends by bombing our houses. Like this depravity and this insanity that exists. Of course it exists. I'm not saying that everything is like systematic, right? But everything that Israel did is completely systematic. The way they occupied, or the way they cut Gaza into different corners, they cut it in the middle. The way they went to Rafah, the way they went to Philadelphia, the way they went in the Netzarim corridor, the way they occupied specific things, the way they destroyed hospitals and schools. All of this is not done just for the revenge. Bombing hospitals is essential in the mindset of Israel because of one reason. Palestinians in general always see hospitals as a safe haven. If their houses are bombed and they're not safe from it, they know for a fact throughout history that if I go to hospital, I'm safe with myself and my family. But if Israel bombs the hospitals, then it creates a sense for Palestinians to feel that there is no sense of safety anywhere in Gaza. And the point of that is to force the people to surrender and for them to leave Gaza, or if they can't leave, at least to stop resisting, to acknowledge and accept consciously. And I want to go back in time in the Second Intifada. The head of the Israeli army in the Second Intifada, the chief of staff, Moshe Ya'alon, he said something very important that I will never forget in my life. I was young in the Second Intifada. One famous thing he did when Israel invaded all of the West Bank, and there was sieges and raids everywhere, he said that it's our job is to burn into the, and I'm quoting or paraphrasing him, to burn into the subconscious of Palestinians that quote-unquote terrorism or resistance is only going to lead to their destruction. This was my outlook and my introduction to Jabotinsky and the concept of the Iron Wall. Because since the beginning of the Zionist movement in the 30s, specifically when Jabotinsky was talking about this, talked about the concept of that in order for the natives of the land, because if you, again, let's go back to the basics. Israel is a settler colonial project. The main objective is to eliminate the native people of the land in order for the new settler colonizers that came from Europe to take over the land, right? In order for the native to stop fighting for their land that was just stolen from them, is you have to make it clear to them that your life, or you have to choose between your life or the land. If you come to the land back, we're gonna murder you, murder your family. So it's burnt into their consciousness that as natives of the land, that there is no point to resist, because Israel is almighty, Israel is invincible, and you have no right to resist with us. Like you don't even have to think about it. So this is why Israel since then in the Zionist movement has talked about the concept of the Iron Wall, the concept that Palestinians have to understand if they choose to resist, we will make them pay a hefty price that they will have to think 1 million times before thinking of resisting again. So this is the strategy of Israel. And everything we've noticed since October 7 until now is Israel doing that to the Palestinians. Is that how dare you think that you can do October 7? How dare you think that you, quote-unquote, barbaric Arabs can plan something like this and embarrass us like this and make us look weak like you did in October 7? And this is the message that they wanted to get out of October 7. Now, this is from a strategic perspective. Now, Israel, of course, wants to get rid of all Palestinians, but the logistics of actually expelling Palestinians from Gaza are very hard. There's 2 million people in Gaza. What are you going to do with them? Where are they going to go? How are they going to survive? Who's gonna help them survive? And as we know, like, Israel is making Gaza uninhabitable right now, so unlivable right now, to force the people of Gaza not to just to leave, as they call it, quote unquote, voluntarily displacement, but to truly force them to truly surrender. And since in the past few months we've noticed a lot of Palestinian and a lot of Arab voices and even Western voices have been asking Hamas and the resistance to just drop their weapons and raise their hands and just surrender for the moment, for the sake of what? Of saving people in Gaza. I truly believe that Israel is doing that strategy. Israel is going all out. They have the impunity from the West. They are being given the green light. They've been supported and given the money and the weaponry needed to force Gazans to surrender. And Netanyahu has made it very clear since the beginning. If you remember, many times he compared the war in Gaza, like the Second World War, specifically the so-called de-radicalization of Japan and Germany. Because to him, he wants people to repeat what happened with Germany and Japan, which is for people to surrender, to accept that they're evil, and to de-radicalize themselves to become part of the Western world by quote-unquote civilizing
they
themselves.
want complete submission through violence and dominance.
That's exactly their plan. Now, if people in Gaza leave, it's a win-win. But again, thinking about everything that I explained, the importance of not pissing off their allies. Now, maybe they thought that Sisi and King Abdullah will be okay with the displacements, which if they thought that, then I'm sorry, but they're idiots, because both guys will not allow it, not for anything, but because of their own good. But I really think this might be a way for Netanyahu and Trump to play like a poker face, to give you like a negotiating technique, right? To tell you, listen, what we want to do is displacement. If you don't want displacement, give us your best shot. Maybe say Hamas will surrender, the resistance will surrender, Gaza will be built based on the conditions of Israel. Like, this is why what Trump has been doing lately, right? Even Mark Rubio, I think earlier today, he said, like, we're waiting for the Arab leaders to give us a proposal. But the only proposal on the table right now is Trump's proposal. That feels like more of negotiating. It doesn't feel like he's forcing Arabs to take that proposal. So maybe Netanyahu and Trump are going all out, right, in order for the Palestinians and the Arabs to come up with with another deal that will undermine the Palestinian cause, and that way it becomes a win-win. Because at the end of the day, if Netanyahu and Israel, if they can quote-unquote de-radicalize Gaza or demilitarize Gaza or get rid of the resistance in Gaza, it's a win-win for them. They don't care about Palestinians and staying in Gaza. All of this nonsense about building Mediterranean villas and Riviera in Gaza is nonsense. Israel has a long coastal access to the Mediterranean Sea. They don't need that small place of Gaza to build more hotels. Like, that's just like populist nonsense to scare off people, I feel.
So you have made a very good argument for why they can't accept this, and that they wouldn't accept this, and that why perhaps Israel might not even really actually want to do this. At the same time, though, this isn't really a new idea, right? I mean, Jared Kushner in Trump's first administration suggested the idea of basically, they talked about artificial man-made islands and putting the people of Gaza there. They talked about dumping the people into the Sinai and just having it be like a worker colony. So this isn't a new idea. And I'm not exactly sure that, despite, the argument that you've made, which I see nothing wrong with, I just don't know if Israel wouldn't be willing to go that far.
I get that, and I'm not. Let me be very direct. I'm not saying that it's like far-fetched. I'm not saying it's not something that is being planned. I'm not saying that Israel and Israel and the U.S. are not. They would love for this to happen for sure, but it goes back to what I said earlier. America and Israel don't do. They don't take action based on emotions or fantasies or what the early Zionist wants, or what the religious Zionist wants, or the so-called extremist Zionist wants. Like, what matters to them is that what are the policies that will continue to protect American interest in the region and protect Israel's security and stability and safety for its own settlers, right? This is what matters at the end of the day. If they do the math, and if they do the calculation, and they realize that if we expel or displace Palestinians from Gaza to Jordan and Egypt, and that might make us lose our allies and might destabilize these regions, then they might end up creating bigger problems than they have in Gaza. Like, imagine Gaza is causing them this much problem, and Gaza is literally an open air prison. Like, people in Gaza, and a few years ago, there was a documentary by Al Jazeera where Hamas fighters and resistance fighters dive deep into the Mediterranean Sea to find bombs that are 100 years old in order to get access to black powder to create bombs. This is how desperate these guys are. So in this Gaza and this desperation and this open air prison that Gaza is in, and Israel cannot defeat them. They cannot beat them after 15, 16 months of genocide. Now, what made you think that those 2 million people who are the popular support for the resistance, if they go to Jordan and Egypt with access to literally the world right now, they might not be able to do more? And what makes you believe that the U.S. will eventually, I mean, outside of Trump, but the Pentagon and CIA, all of the institutions that exist here, when they go to Trump and tell him, listen, you can accomplish that. I'm telling you right now, Trump tomorrow can call the King of Jordan and Sisi and tell him, listen, this is happening. They will listen. They have to listen. Like, these guys cannot survive without the U.S. And this is why Catch-22. Jordan and Egypt cannot survive without the support of the U.S., but also U.S. interest in the region cannot survive without Jordan and Egypt. So it feels that Jordan and Egypt now realize this leverage that they have, just like Israel utilizes the leverage that they have with the U.S. and they do whatever the heck they want. Then this is maybe the why they're pushing back in order for them to survive, even though they know if the aid is cut by the U.S., that might jeopardize their survival. But they know they can use that as a way to their own people that, oh, we went against the U.S., we need your support. And I trust me, the people in the region will support them anytime they stand against the U.S., against American imperialism or against the
Will
US.
they, though? Because you raise a very interesting point, the Jordanization of the Palestinian people who were dumped into Jordan. And when I was in Amman a month ago, and I've been to Amman many times, as a teenager. Beautiful country. And in comparison to the rest of the Middle East, is organized, is clean, they have infrastructure. It's unlike the rest of the Middle East. And when I saw, especially in the wintertime, the weather is very beautiful in the hills. Like, it reminded me a lot of Palestine. I've been to Palestine once. Yeah. I went in the spring, and it was very similar. And the Jordanian dinar is stronger than the dollar, and it's very expensive in Amman. It's a proper place to live. Yeah. I don't think these people would be interested truly in undermining that. People don't want to see their cities turn into Gaza. And Israel has made very clear, we will turn every Middle Eastern city into Gaza if you challenge us or if you threaten our security. And other than the Jordanian bus driver who pulled out a gun and shot some Israeli troops at the border, what has any of our people in the region done?
No, definitely. I think that's the problem. That's what I'm saying about Jordan's importance and the pivotal role it plays in protecting the U.S. Hegemony and protecting Israel. That's exactly what they did, is to stop Jordanians from doing anything and to stop the people in Jordan to do anything in Israel. That's literally their mission, and they're succeeding in it. There's no denying it. And that's why I'm saying they have the leverage. Now, but I disagree with you in the sense of the majority of the people in the region, and we've seen that since the Arab Spring and even before, anytime there's an uprising anywhere, the Palestinian flag will be, in the front lines, because people understand that their freedom is limited because of the cause of Palestine. They're not allowed to thrive, because if they thrive, that will be a threat to Israel, and Israel has to be the superior power in the region. And as such, these regimes have to be tyrants and to suppress their own people. I know for a fact, if the King of Jordan tomorrow goes all out and dissents against the U.S. interest in the region and says, listen, the U.S. and Israel are forcing me to displace Palestinians from Gaza. I'm going to stand up to them and I need you to support me. People will go in the millions in the street. I know for a fact. There's no question about it. And you can think about the Islamic movements in Jordan. You can think of the average person, because unfortunately they created the sense that whatever the king says is in the best interest of our region because of the reasons that I provided earlier today. But if he goes out and he said, listen, I need your help, everybody will stand up with him. As a matter of fact, and this has been discussed many times, if you go to social media and look at Egyptian people, specifically the youth that were expelled out of Egypt, when Sisi took the power after the coup, a lot of them say, listen, we are willing to forgive Sisi with everything he's done if he supports Gaza, if he supports Palestine. I don't think the average people are worried about, their cities being turned into Gaza. I think that's the propaganda, and that's the fear that the regimes play on to scare off and to legitimize their reasons of why they stand up against them.
I don't mean to doubt the sincerity or the support of our people, one. And two, I don't want to give people the idea that I think this can or will happen. But I just want to push back a little bit, because I do think that there is the possibility, there's room for it. And I even want to ask you specific questions. I plan to ask you, theoretically, just putting yourself in the shoes of the regimes in Jordan or Egypt or Trump or Netanyahu, how they plan to actually move people from Gaza into Jordan. Because Gaza, they can easily push them into Egypt. It's just a walk across the border. But to get into Jordan, they either have to go to Egypt, then get to Jordan somehow, or they have to go through Israel, occupied Palestine, the West Bank, and then cross into Jordan. So what, you're going to put these people by force on buses, and some of them are secret resistance members? You know, what is the feasibility in that? But I want people to be, you know, God forbid, you know, open-minded to the possibility that this actually could happen. Like, Egypt has a ton of debt. If they offered Egypt, really, we will wipe your debt entirely. I mean, that's very lucrative just to take on another million people. Okay, you have to wipe my debt and bring investment. And Trump is already saying, you know, I'm going to force them to take these people and I'm going to have the Arabs pay for it and invest in it. So there's that aspect. And then in Jordan, no disrespect to the Jordanian people, because I know in their hearts that both the Jordanians and the Palestinians, their heart is with Palestine. At the same time, though, they watched a genocide for a year and they didn't overthrow their king. And I'm not saying that they should, because I'm not encouraging people to destroy their societies. I don't know what the answer is. But they didn't overthrow their king. They had some protests at the embassy and blah, blah, blah. But other than that, the Jordanians didn't have to work very hard to keep the people down. And neither did the Egyptians. And,
that's very true, yeah.
And they intercepted missiles on the way going to hit Israel. They did nothing. They allowed for trucks to feed Israel and help them curb and get around this Houthi blockade in the Red Sea. And the Jordanian people did nothing. So our people, yes, our hearts are with them. At the same time, though, what did they do? That's why when I go to Amman and I see the way they're living, they feel bad, blah, blah, blah. You go to a warehouse, they donate some food, and we're sending it to Gaza. And it's just 2012, 2014. The genocide is much bigger than that, but it's just another repeat of give charity, but we don't want that mess here. So I really don't know that these people would revolt against I believe they would, because I agree with you. Strategically, it is a death sentence for them. At the same time, though, after seeing what we've seen, I think what Trump and Netanyahu are betting on is that you people have done nothing. You're not going to do anything. So let's just be real about it. The cat's out the bag. We will clear your debts through investment, and we will help you rejuvenate your economy. We'll help you build housing. We'll even invest in factories for these people to become slave laborers, basically, to boost your economy and boost ours, and we'll let you split the pie. Let's just cut to the chase and be real about it. And I think we have to consider that as an option, given what we've seen.
No, I think you're spot on. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. As a matter of fact, yes, it's actually very embarrassing and very not just embarrassing, but like very frustrating and very heartbreaking that during the genocide, the majority of the Arab world didn't do much, to be honest. Yes, there were protests, but as you mentioned, it was, you know, we were protesting in the U.S. maybe more than them, unfortunately. That's the reality. And I agree with you in your analysis. And that's exactly my point about the concept of Jordanizing the citizens of Jordan into accepting, and this is why I made a disclaimer before when I talked about the Jordan identity as a political identity and not an ethnic identity, because of that, exactly what you mentioned, because it has been invoking Moshe Ayalon here. It's like it burnt into their consciousness that the best course of action for us as Jordanians is to just follow the king into looking for security and stability, because it brings us security and stability, as you mentioned. And that's a problem. And that's the majority of the Arab regimes are playing the same exact game. But I want to also, I know we get carried away by analyzing too much Jordan and Egypt, but I think what's more important, and it answers also the first part of your question, it's not that the problem with displacement is just because of the interests of the U.S., the interests of Israel, and also, you know, the political legitimacy of these regimes in Jordan and Egypt, but also the most important component here, the most important factor is actually the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza are not going to leave. And that's what I always say, is that, you know, the U.S. and Israel can feel that they're invincible and they can do whatever the heck they want, but the reality is that, you know, people of Gaza are not going to leave their homeland. They know that Nakba is not going to be repeated, and if we witnessed and learned anything in the past 15 months, is that no matter how much you bomb these people, they don't surrender. What happened in Jabalia for months and I actually wrote an article about this, the Jabalia Doctrine, is that Israel literally used the concept of genocide, of literally eliminating people non-stop as a way to force people to be displaced, but displaced not just physically, but mentally, to go back to the concept of, either you surrender and subjugate to us, you subjugate yourself to the occupation, stop resisting, or we're going to eliminate you and your whole family. This is exactly what Israel did. Yet, as soon as the ceasefire agreement took place, and we get to like the first week when Netzarim Corduroy was opened, what was the first thing that people in Gaza did? They went back to their homes to the north. The people who were forced to be displaced. Now we got to understand, like I think about 200,000 to 300,000 people stayed in the north, right? Not everybody got displaced or flee to the south. Every single person who was displaced from the north in the south, they were camping overnight, waiting for the corduroy to open, Netzarim corduroy to be opened, so they can go back to their homes. Now, when I say by homes, I just mean geographically speaking, because there was no homes. Everything was destroyed. These guys are living in tents in the north, and the majority of them are telling you they ran and they walked for hours, 6-7 hours a day, just to get their homes. Some few elders died walking to their homes in the north. These guys could have chosen to stay in the south, right, in the south of Gaza, and wait for help to come, a humanitarian aid to come. They went to the north with no plan, no money, no clean water, knowing very well that everything in their community has been destroyed, but they still went back north. And many of them were interviewed, and they mentioned that, I don't care about living and having basic human needs. All I care about is I want to go die on my land, because that's why I belong, and I will never ever allow a second Nakba to happen. So these guys are shrewd. They're loyal to the land. They know how important it is not to be displaced from their homes. So Egypt and Jordan can agree all they want, but how are you going to be moving 2 million people? The only way to move them, and let's be very honest too, and I'm not saying this in a sense of just showing the resilience of the people of Gaza as a way for me to celebrate that resilience and that resistance and that commitment and dedication, but truly, logistically speaking, Israel literally didn't just bomb every single inch of Gaza. They were on the ground. Were they able to expel people out of Jabalia? To the south. The people of Jabalia were forced, the refugee camp, to just get out of the refugee camp. You can go south, you can go center. You don't have to go to Rafah, for example. Just leave the refugee camp. And they were bombing them nonstop. Soldiers on the ground. Did the people leave? Absolutely not. So you want people who did not leave because of bombing, non-stop bombardment, genocide, boots on the ground, shooting people in the hospitals, destroying schools, starving them to death. These guys did not move out of their homes. You want them to be leaving to Jordan and Egypt? How the heck are you going to move them? There's no way you can move these people. That's just the reality. And the resistance are not going to allow this to happen, because they know if they leave the land of Gaza, that means it's a second Nakba, and this will put us back in time. And they know the importance of the land, because as I mentioned before, the settler colonial project, it's all about the land. People might say, people in the West don't understand this concept, the concept of settler colonialism. They don't understand why people in Palestine are obsessed with their lands. It's not that the Palestinians are sure they love their lands, they're loyal to this is their identity, this is their culture, but because they understand politically that the struggle in Palestine is about the land. And if they leave the land, then there's no life anymore, because they become refugees around the world, and that's, to them, it's not something they want. They don't want to give up on their country, so they would rather die on their land, because that paves the way for the newer generation to continue to live on that land rather than, letting go of that land. So, yes, forget about all of the geopolitical analysis that we talked about. The reality is people of Gaza are not going to leave. Now, good luck moving 2 million people by force. I mean, of course, not every single person in Gaza is going to stick around. I'm sure there are tens of thousands of people might choose to leave, and nobody should blame them at all. These people have been under blockade and war after war, and a genocide in the past 15 months. But the reality is, if you were not able to move the people outside of the refugee camp of Jabalia, after being starved to death for months, you're not going to be moving 2 million people outside of Gaza. That's just a reality. And this is important to highlight because, again, America and Israel are not invincible. They're not gods. They can't just, whatever they want to do, they will be able to do it. All of these sellout leaders can work out with them, even if they don't choose to, do what's best, even if they agree. Hopefully, we know for a fact that people of Gaza, inshallah, they won't leave.
Inshallah, and I think you're right about that. I think the number one reason why this won't work is the people of Gaza, and they've already proven so much. And so, may Allah reward them and protect them. Inshallah, what they've gone through is unbelievable. I want to ask you about Saudi Arabia now, because obviously Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Jordan aren't just vassals of the U.S. They kind of follow the lead of Saudi Arabia, and they orbit their influence as well because of the amount of investment. So Saudi Arabia is very influential, and they were very concerned, like with the revolution in Egypt. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Khalij as a whole was very invested in what was going to happen next and how it would affect them. So Saudi Arabia now, normalization was on the table. October 7th threw a wrench in that. A lot of people have been leaking statements by MBS where he basically says, hey, on the surface of it, I don't really care about Palestine. I have to put on this front, but behind the scenes, we can still make something happen, but I need you to work with me. But it seems like that has sort of changed recently. Netanyahu kind of humiliated him by saying, if you want a Palestinian state, why don't you take the Palestinians? And MBS understands, obviously, how powerful Israel is, but at the same time, I think Norman Finkelstein talked about this recently as well. He commented on this, and I think it's a very good theory that Saudi Arabia was engaging in normalization, believing that they were somewhat equals with the Israelis. But now they're realizing that Netanyahu and the Israelis will never see them as equals, and humiliating them, telling them, oh, you want a state, and you think it's worth, you really think it's worth us, we'll give you a Palestinian state, and in exchange, we'll let you invest in us. Like, we're not equals like that. We're not even interested in that. So how is Saudi Arabia, how is their tone changing now that they see this potential proposal with Egypt and Jordan, and how are they getting involved in potentially uniting with them to put a resistance up to Trump and say, no, we don't accept this under any circumstances?
Yeah, I think Saudi is very interesting because, like, if you want, we can't talk about like today's view of Saudi when it comes to Palestine without taking a step back. And I want to start by saying, like, in the early 70s, there was a senator, his name I think was Jackson. He said that America has created a concept of tripartite system in the Middle East, like a triangle of their allies in the region. And that time it was Saudi, Israel, and the Shah of Iran before the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And he called Iran and Israel as the guardians of the Gulf. Why? Because Saudi provides a very important coverage or legitimacy to American imperialism in the region, which is to bring in an Islamic legitimacy to American existence in the region, American interest in the region. So they need Saudi to be an ally to America. Sure, the oil is important to America, but Saudi provides, because of its place as the state for the holy sites for Muslims, the history, specifically modern history when it comes to modern and pre-modern, when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ's history being from Saudi and Hijaz and the Islamic legitimacy of that region. So that region, because of that sacredness that comes with it, everybody looks at Saudi as a compass in terms of like the Muslim state. So America realized this early in the 70s and even before the 70s, and they made sure that they are allied with them. And again, even before the Americans, the British did the same thing, right? Again, we talked about Sharif Hussein when he collaborated with the British in the early when the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, and that family came from Saudi. So that history of collaborating with the colonizers is not something new. It's not a new phenomenon. It's been there for a long time. But America came and took over the region from so-called Great Britain at that time. So America understands the importance of Saudi. And what America was doing was empowering Israel and the Shah of Iran to protect Saudi from nationalist movements in that region, specifically in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s, specifically Jamal Abdel Nasser, the leftists, the Palestinian leftists in the 50s and the 60s, and the whole movement of decolonization. As we all know, the global South went through the phases of decolonizations from the 40s all the way to the 60s, and the rise of nationalist movements led by Abdel Nasser and other leaders, and specifically the influence of the Soviet Union that carried on the influence of let's decolonize and let's fight against American hegemony and American imperialism and American capitalism. So Saudi was at risk because the people wanted national liberation in all of the Muslim and Arab world, and Saudi was seen as this backward, regressive regime that is in bed with empires, that we need to get rid of them because they are providing legitimacy to European colonialism. So America realized that. And this is why the senator in the early 70s, before the collapse of the Shah in Iran, emphasized that importance. And even after the Islamic Revolution of Iran took place, it's important to understand that the main key player into bringing in the sectarian warfare in the Muslim community, Muslim world, was Saudis. Saudis start producing material against about Shi'ism, start producing content against Iran because they saw Iran as not just a geopolitical competitor, but the reality is they were doing the dirty work of America. America was using the Saudi to bring in them that Islamic legitimacy. So the Muslim world look at America as an ally, and Iran, as an enemy because they're Shi'i, and Shia are the enemies of Sunni Muslims, ironically. So since then, Saudi has been doing this, and just a anecdotal, a different, like going a little bit off tangent to explain this a little bit more. If folks remember when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and this whole concept of relationship between the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and the U.S., it's very important to note that America didn't just play a role into supporting them. They were collaborating with Saudi to provide ideological legitimacy for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. The CIA helped Saudi print out ideological content in favor of jihad against the communists in Afghanistan. So America understands the importance of ideological warfare, understand the importance of providing an Islamic legitimacy to support its interest in the region. So they see Saudi as that main player that provides the ideological framework. And as we know, since the beginning of the Arab Spring, even the main enemy of the Arab Springs, or what we know as the counter-revolutionary forces, are mostly Saudi and UAE, right? They're the ones, and their so-called scholars in Saudi have been harassing and bullying Ikhwan and Muslim Brotherhood and calling them traitors and non-Muslims, and question their Islamic ideology and how they are disturbing or ruining the Islamic legacy and all of that nonsense, because they wanted to legitimize these tyrant regimes by undermining and demonizing and dehumanizing the Islamic movements. So that's the job of Saudi. And this is why America has invested so much in protecting Saudi in the past. But after the collapse of Shah of Iran, they needed Israel to step up more and to support Saudi and protect its influence in the region. And since then, of course, Egypt has become the new ally since America lost Iran because of the Islamic Revolution. Egypt and Israel has been playing that role of protecting Saudi against nationalist movements and Islamic movements nowadays. So that's the role of Saudi, historically speaking, and how they came about protecting American interest and hegemony in the region. Nowadays, especially with MBS, he's going through this mission of trying to replicate UAE. He sees that UAE has invested so much money and resources into so-called modernization of the Gulf country by spending so much money in building useless buildings and inviting investors and doing parties and entertainment and making it like the Las Vegas of the Middle East. And this guy just see UAE model as a good model to follow. Because unfortunately, these guys have money, but they don't have, good ideas. And the best way to, spend their money is to just copy another model that exists, and it's proven to be successful because Dubai, from material perspective, forget about their politics, they're a successful like model, right? They can bring in tourists, they can be like a place for people to go hang out in the winter and find like enjoy their time in luxury and all of that nonsense that from a material perspective. Saudi wants to copy that. From a so-called a rebuilding of the Saudi nation, but the problem is that politically, Saudi is part of the so-called moderate, regimes or moderate axis that exist in the region, with Saudi and Jordan and Egypt, that so-called seeking the two-state solution. So they have always been against the resistance. They have always been collaborators and compromisers, and they have always threw the Palestinian cause under the bus. What's happening recently is that Trump is undermining the soft power that America has been playing for ages. The politics of Henry Kissinger, where he laughs in your face but backstabs you, right? Saudis used to America always highlighting them as the pioneer and the leaders of the Arab world and the Muslim world. And then this guy who's a narcissist, and he undermines all of them. So that to them, that makes them look bad. They already look bad in a sense of in front of the people because they're collaborators, but then that they are risking their reputation in front of their own people for the sake of the empire being happy with them. But then now the empire is not even happy with them. So what's the point of them pissing off their people? It feels like they're shooting themselves in the foot. But again, it goes back to the previous analysis that I provided, which is that it's not in the best interest of Jordan and Egypt to agree on these displacement plans. And Saudi needs Jordan and Egypt as their allies in the region. Otherwise, they'll be isolated. If Jordan and Egypt are destabilized, Saudi will be next. Because if you think about it, Egypt has been providing the political cover for the so-called moderate axis because they're the most powerful Arab country. They're the most the most powerful one in terms of military-wise, technologically advancement in that sense. They're the most powerful Arab state, and historically speaking has been the heavyweights when it comes to politics, right? Anytime you need a peace process in the region, anytime you need to solve the Palestinian cause, you need to go to the Egyptians. It's a very common thing. But lately, Egypt has been losing that, right, in favor of Saudi and Jordan and whatnot. And Saudi knows that if I lose Jordan and Saudi and Egypt, then I'm going to be left alone. Because at the end of the day, UAE, yes, they have the money and they've been empowered, like giving money to, counter-revolutionary forces in Sudan and Tunisia and everywhere, in Egypt, everywhere. But at the end of the day, politically speaking, they're not powerful. Nobody takes them seriously from a political perspective, right? So if Saudi is left alone, then they will be tossed around, and I don't think Saudi wants to be tossed around. Saudi wants to still be respected as a main player, as a key actor in the region, and they don't want to be puppets. Of course, we know politically they are puppets and stooges to the West, but they don't want to be. It's one thing to be taken that way by people who have a counter American hegemony perspective, but they don't want to be presented as puppets by Trump. Of course, I'm just oversimplifying, but the concept is that Saudi will not benefit from the destabilization of Egypt and Jordan, and this is why they're kind of supporting Egypt and Jordan into rejecting those plans because they don't want to see it happening. And they are, I think those allies, they just wrapped up like a summit today in Saudi, and I think they will continue to. Eventually, they will come up with a plan that doesn't invoke displacement. But as I mentioned before, that plan would definitely not be in the best interest of Palestinians. But it would be something that will still give them the political legitimacy that they're not in favor of that displacement plan.
Do you think if Palestinians are displaced into Jordan, that Iran could arm resistance there and produce instability against Jordan? Do you think Iran would do that? And do you think they could do that? Because that would obviously be very concerning to Saudi Arabia.
So one thing I know this might not answer the question directly, but one thing we have to see this the way it is. The Palestinian resistance in general don't work for Iran, and they don't care about Iran's geopolitical needs. And this has been evident in the case of Hamas. As a matter of fact, many people argue now that October 7 has been chaotic for the axis of resistance, right? It cost Iran and Hezbollah dearly. So Hamas doesn't function in terms of what Iran needs. Now, would that mean that maybe other faction and this Iran tried doing that in Gaza a few years ago when they created the party of Sabirin, the patient ones, and it did not succeed. Because throughout history, specifically in Gaza and in Palestinian resistance, no nation was able to control Palestinian resistance movements. Like Palestinian resistance movements are very shrewd, very political. They understand the game. They understand the characters around the world. They know that their main focus is Israeli occupation and nobody else. So they don't want to piss off anybody else. Palestinians will not agree to be stooges or proxies for Iran in Jordan. But definitely, it would make it easy for Iran to support the Palestinian resistance in Jordan, 100%. I mean, the borders to Iraq, especially, would be very easy to start smuggling way more weapons than Hamas was allowed to smuggle in with the borders of Egypt. So that's what I said earlier. If you bring in the resistance to Jordan, granted, the borders of Israel on the east side will be chaotic for years, and it will be very hard for them to control it. And it will make it very easy for Iran. But I don't know if Iran is interested in, right now fighting with Saudi or even Jordan, as we are seeing. Iran is not invoking Saudi. Even Houthis Ansarullah in Yemen, they have not been doing anything against Saudi. I think Iran is actually, as a matter of fact, trying to get closer with Saudi and in the Gulf region because they're trying to minimize the amount of fronts that they have to battle. The long answer is that, what I mentioned, the Palestinians don't work for Iran. But the short answer, Iran will be easy for Iran to support the Palestinian resistance in Jordan. Eventually, it will undermine Jordan because of the reasons that we talked about, but that might not be the main goal.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that the Palestinians would be stooges, I guess, or puppets for Iran as proxies. But just, if they were forcibly displaced, then there's a lot of anger at everyone complicit in that, and the Jordanians would be. And that's just ripe territory of young displaced men, angry, who lost family members. Put a gun in their hand if you can, and they'll shoot at whoever they find to be complicit potentially.
I get completely what you're saying, but again, Palestinians in general have not been engaging, against other Arabs. Like, look, let's take, for example, Sisi. Let's take Egypt, for example. Egypt has directly, and I argue that Egypt is not even complicit in the genocide in Gaza. Egypt was a partner in the genocide in Gaza, blocking the border and stopping people from leaving, and blockading and besieging Gaza from even like clean water to enter Gaza without the permission of Israel. That to me is not just a war crime. That's like partnership in the genocide on behalf of the Egyptian regime. Yet people in Gaza since 2006 until now, since the blockade started, they've never attacked Egypt. They're more than capable of, by the way. And if you remember in the 2008-2009 war, when people in Gaza walked to Egypt, like they destroyed the fence and they walked to Egypt. But what did they do in Egypt? They literally, during the war, they went to Egypt, they took their own money, they went to the Egyptian markets, they bought their needs and walked back to Gaza. Like they didn't even stay in Egypt until the war was done. They went back to Gaza because these people are so attached to their land. So these people are politically savvy, they're loyal to their land, and they're not hateful to people. The resistance in Gaza is not done out of spite. It's not that because these youth, their parents died and now they want to seek revenge against Gaza. Sure, revenge is a normal human behavior that people engage in, but the Palestinian resistance is strategic, it's political, it has specific goals and objectives. So the only thing they need to do in Jordan for Jordan to be destabilized is them resisting against Israel. That's all they need to do. They don't need to engage with the regime, and it's not in the best interest of the Palestinian movement to even engage with the regime, because that will make the regime crack down on them, right? Even if they want to. But Palestinian resistance in general has been very focused on the occupation, and they would rather not engage. Now, just so I'm, transparent and honest with myself and with the viewers, is that there were some clashes in late 60s and early 70s between Fatah and the PLO and the Jordanian regime. But that has to be contextualized within the concept of Jordanian king at that time did not want the resistance to stay, and he wanted to collaborate with the regime. And unfortunately, there are some, bad actors within the Palestinian movement back then that did instigate and do certain things. It's known that were not ideal. Even in Lebanon, unfortunately, Palestinians were dragged into the game of a lot of these different ethnicities and different religions and different creeds in Jordan. All of the ideological issues that exist in Lebanon. Some Palestinians were engaged in it, not engaged, but were dragged into it. And they had to choose a side versus the other side. But at the end of the day, Palestinians in general do their best not to interfere with anybody's business and focus on the occupation.
I've got a bit of a statement here that I want to read to you.
Okay.
And then my question will come at the end. Okay. So here's how I see the situation. Prior to October 7th, the widely known secret was that Israel truly ran things in the region and had successfully infiltrated the governments and decision-making processes of their neighbors in Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, either directly or through the influence of their U.S. ally. But Israel's position as the regional hegemon wasn't exactly set in stone, as Iran and the axis of resistance still stood in open opposition, even if there wasn't any direct confrontation between them. After October 7th, however, it seems that Israel's hegemony still isn't set in stone. It feels that they are at the finish line, about to walk across and cement themselves for the next generation at least as the hegemon of the region, with the most fighter jets, nuclear weapons, and full support from the world superpower, the United States. But the cementing of Israeli hegemony seems dependent upon two things. One, Saudi Arabian normalization agreements that would flood Israel with more investment money and partnership deals for security. And number two, an Irani nuclear deal that guarantees that Iran would avoid securing a weapon of mass destruction, which would make them equally powerful to Israel. So there are two directions the region could move in, and October 7th seems to have been this last-second act of defiance to prevent Israeli hegemony being cemented for good in the region. Is this how you see it as well? And if so, what would you add?
What is the
what is the question?
Where's the quote from? Or
no, that's not a quote. This is what I think.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That this is like if we zoom out, what this is all about, these negotiations and this attack and negotiating with Iran, and Israel is trying to basically come out into the open now and say what we've all already known for a long time. But this is about Israeli hegemony in the region.
I think in spirit, I think what you mentioned is definitely true. I just disagree with a couple of things from a technical perspective. So when we talk about Israeli hegemony, there is no such thing as Israeli hegemony, or Israel didn't need to infiltrate any decision-making processes. Israel, all it needs to be is for Israel to be the superior power in the region, and that's what America's goal has always been about, maintaining the superiority of Israel in the region from an economic sense, from a military sense, from a technological advancement sense, from security sense, from all senses that Israel has to be the superior. And this is why America invests so much in Israel. Let's take, for example, tech companies. They invest billions of dollars in Israel. Why? I mean, the obvious reason is that they want to benefit from Israel as a colonial project that is actively engaged in wars and occupation. All of that knowledge can be produced and can be sent back to the metropolitan, to the Western world. And as we've learned that, the police in the U.S. trains where? They trains in Israel. That's a simple answer, right? Or simple example that Israel helps the West. But also, if you think about it, Israel also participates in military and war expos around the world. Like, if you remember, early in the last year, France banned Israel from participating in one of their military expos, right? These military expos is where Israel goes and sells the technologies that they use on Palestinians to export them to Western worlds to buy. So Israel is not just a state or a client state that benefits America in the region by destabilizing the region, but all of the knowledge that is being produced in Israel is very beneficial to the Western colonial world, from counterinsurgency, from weaponry, from technology, from tracking, from civilians. All all of that, all the spying game, all of that is beneficial to the West, and Israel sells it back to the West by practicing it on the people in Palestine. And if you think about it, the Western world in the 19th century was experimenting on the people in the global South. Let's take, for example, French. The French, when they colonized Algeria, they used to experiment their chemical weapons and nuclear weapons on the people of Algeria, killing hundreds of thousands of Algerians by testing weapons on them, right? Now, in the region or in the world of the 20th century, when the world has decolonized, the Western world still need to test things, still need the technology, still need the content, but they cannot test it themselves because the world has moved past the colonial era, the direct boots on the ground. But Israel still provides them access to that world in the current world. So the Western world now is reliving the 19th century era through Israel. They're bypassing time, going back in time by investing in Israel to provide them with what they need. So, and this is why I argue, like, others like Noam Chomsky and Abdulhaq X and other scholars, that Israel is actually a client state to the US. Yes, Israel has evolved to become more than a client state. It's becoming more of like there's an Australian scholar, he calls Israel a sub-imperialist, right? They have so much leverage on the colonial world themselves that they themselves becoming not an imperialist power, but sub-imperialist, like, in the middle, almost there, because they know their leverage that they have on the imperial world. So understanding this, we understand that Israel and the US, and the Western world, it's in their best interest for Israel to continue to be the superior power in the region. So they don't need to infiltrate anybody. They don't need to spy on anybody. All they need to do is for the US and Europe to continue to crushing the Arab world and to continue to place tyrants to be in charge of these countries, and these tyrants in return will oppress their own people to stay in power. And once you oppress your own people, then these regions will never thrive, they will never prosper, and they will continue to be lacking, and it will be way behind Israel. And Israel having so much power, so much destructive power, as we've seen in Gaza, they can just threaten these countries, and these countries will be worried. They will worried about not their own people, but they will be worried about their own positions. They want to stay in power. And Israel just creates that formula, or the US and the Europe create that formula for the region, and then everybody is intimidated, or what Israel likes to call it, the concept of deterrence. Israel is huge on the concept of deterrence, right? All of their leaders, especially Shimon Peres, talked about this in the 80s and the 90s. He wrote a book about this. I forget the exact title of it, but it's about deterrence, right? It's about that, Israel had to always have the upper hand and always retaliate 10 times more, and will always tell the Arabs that we are crazier than you, and if you dare to do something, we'll retaliate against us. And that creates the concept of deterrence. And that's what Israel is about. They can't sustain wars all the time. They can't sustain a dragging war or a war of attrition, as said, or as people say. They can't, because it's a small country, right? And their economy is dependent on the West. So all of this, what I'm mentioning here, is that technical disagreement about them infiltrating and spying and controlling. It's more of the reality of what the West creates in the Middle East, that superiority of Israel. Once it's superior, nobody dares to challenge it, and they will get their way whether people like it or not. And it becomes a game of balance between the Arab regimes who wants to stay in power, and they understand if they go against Israel, they will lose their position, and they will lose their power grip, and they would rather keep it, so they abide by Israeli and American and European strategies. So that is the only thing I wanted to explain. But in general, I think you're right. Yes, the region was going towards the direction of liquidating the Palestinian cause because Arabs, with the exception of Egypt and Jordan in the 90s, all of these countries said we will never normalize with Israel until Israel accepts the two-state solution and gives Palestinians their own state, and then we can engage in normalization. What Trump did was to go through to every single country by itself and try to normalize between them and Israel to undermine the Palestinian cause. because Arabs were empowered by the Palestinian cause, and the Palestinian cause was empowered by the Arabs because they realized the Arabs are not going to compromise. They will still use Palestine as a card to not normalize with Israel. But Trump removed that leverage that has for the Palestinian cause had, and this is where it feels to, as you mentioned, that October 7 was a last attempt of for the last attempt to maintain the Palestinian cause to. I don't want to even say to stay relevant, but to actually survive. Otherwise, if all of these regions normalize, all of these countries normalize with Israel, then literally Palestine and Palestinians and people in Gaza will be left alone, and nobody will say anything about it. As we've seen in the past 15 months, as you mentioned yourself in Jordan, nobody does anything about it because these people have their own interest in Jordan with Israel, and they don't want to compromise that interest because of Palestinians. Palestinians will solve their own problems, and then maybe Palestinians will be forced to accept a deal based on whatever Netanyahu says. So yeah, I think in general, yeah, I agree with what you said.
I'll share with you my thoughts. The reason why I'm thinking about this, I think there are two things. One, the United States objective, like you said, is not just to empower Israel to make them superior over the others, to keep the region divided and destabilized because it's easier to conquer that way. That's not the only reason why, but as you said, it's a very important reason. I think the U.S. is beginning to undermine their own interests in the region and it's the same concept in Europe. One of the primary reasons for the Russia-Ukraine war that I think a lot of people overlook, it wasn't just about let's try to sneak Ukraine into NATO. I think they always understood that if that happens, that's great, but that's not really what this is about. The Ukraine war, in my view, and I've heard other respectable analysts share this view as well, the purpose for the Russia-Ukraine war was to sever the relationship between Russia and Germany economically, because Germany had become too powerful and they had gained a lot of control in the European Union, and that's what made Britain want to leave. They engaged in Brexit because they knew they couldn't compete with Germany in the European Union with these free trade deals. So Germany had become too wealthy, too powerful, and they were getting way too close to Russia. And now Russia and Germany were going to rise, and that makes it harder for the U.S. to maintain control over Europe. So they undermined that, and they made sure to put Germany back in its place, and they weakened their economy. And they've been experiencing basically a recession ever since the Ukraine war started. And this is an important U.S. ally, and the U.S. undermined Germany in order to bring them back down so they could maintain more control over Europe. The same concept in the Middle East, it's a balancing act between all these different powers. But now, because of the influence and the leverage that the Zionist lobby has, I think it's time to start seeing them really as an independent, powerful actor. They carry the leash now. The U.S. system, political system, is completely hijacked by the Zionist lobby. They are not only funneling it, if it was just about money, the Saudis could compete in the U.S. political system, but they are gatekeepers in the media and in the Pentagon and in the White House. Biden's administration, out of 100 people, 67 of them were Zionist Jews. The Secretary of State, Blinken, went to Israel and said, today I visit you as a Jew. I'm the Secretary of State of the United States, but today I'm here for you basically as an Israeli, is what he said. They have an incredible amount of leverage, and they're beginning to use that leverage to undermine America's own strategy of control in the region, which is keep everyone equal with one another. You would think it's actually in the U.S. interest to keep Iran as powerful enough to challenge Israel to some extent, but they want Iran to negotiate away its ability to challenge Israel. The reality is, even though Turkey has a powerful military to some extent, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. I know you said that Israel is a small country, but warfare has changed dramatically. And it doesn't matter how small Israel is. There's only so much amount of territory they have to defend because of their size. They don't need to fight across the entire Middle East. They just need to fight across certain strategic locations. And as we saw in 1967, in 10 minutes, their Air Force wiped out the Egyptian Air Force and completely decimated their military. Now, all the strength of artillery, soldiers, tanks that Egypt has is undermined by Israel's control of the skies. And that gap has widened. If you look at Egypt, just Google Egypt's Air Force and compare it to Israel's. It's not even a comparison. What Egypt has is so old, and whatever is advanced, the U.S. can turn off remotely. Israel is flying these advanced F-35s, and they have 200 or so nuclear weapons, and they have an established doctrine, which I know is kind of a secret, but they have the Samson initiative or whatever it's called, where if they're threatened, they'll actually vaporize the entire region. So they are, in a way, a hegemon, but they are still dependent because they don't have this open normalization where they can trade for a lot of the resources in the region. Honestly, ask yourself this. In the Middle East, if there were these normalization deals that allowed for Israeli companies to openly invest and do business and compete against other Middle Eastern businesses and corporations in the region, do you think there'd be any competition? The Israelis, through the use of the Mossad and the way they organize themselves, would take over the resources in the region. And this is what I mean by establishing themselves as a hegemon. They can legitimately become, and we know they have the Greater Israel Project, they can legitimately become the rulers of the entire region. And the only thing standing in the way is whether Iran, in my opinion, gets a nuclear weapon, and if Saudi Arabia is willing to open up their economy to them. I know it's a pessimistic view.
No, it's not about pessimistic. I think it's more of like I definitely disagree with you on most things you mentioned. And let's take it one piece at a time.
Okay.
How can you be a hegemon if you're dependent on another empire?
My point is, through the normalization deal, you'll no longer be dependent on this other empire.
But so how much money is the investment Saudis going to bring you every year?
It's not about the investment they'll bring them. It's about now opening up their economy, tourism, entertainment, infrastructure, construction.
With who?
The entire region.
Well, the region, the average Joe in the Middle East is not going to go visit Israel for tourism. That's just Jordan. People in Jordan have permission. They can apply for permits to go up and visit, Tel Aviv and whatnot through tourism because of the...
I don't mean tourism to Israel. I mean, like you see now, Saudi Arabia basically is creating themselves as a consumer economy.
Right.
Look,
how is that going to benefit Israel?
We love wrestling because they dominate entertainment.
So how is that going to benefit Israel?
Israeli businesses will profit from the consumption. Saudi Arabia will now be consuming with their hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars from Israeli corporations and businesses. And in exchange, they get mineral resources, they get oil, they get gas, they get their corporations now. What happens when you have normalization?
So you're saying that what you're
Israeli companies
is Israel is trying to get out of being very dependent on America, kind of.
Yes, I think normalization removes that dependency. It now opens up the vast mineral resources that are untapped all over the region.
Look, I don't necessarily agree on that part that Israel is trying to lessen its dependence on the U.S. Because since the beginning of the Zionist movement and since late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a lot of conversations and a lot of discussions about reliance on the West. And there was major battles between Zionist leaders about, should we be friends with the British Empire or should we bomb the British Empire and their interest in Palestine when the Haganas used to bomb British interest in Palestine. There was major issues, but eventually Zionists realized that without the support of the colonial world, they cannot survive in the region. And the reality is the genocide in Gaza would have not been able to continue more than a month if it was not for American support and the bombs and the money and the political cover. Look, no matter how much Israel tries to escape the dependence on America, America is still the big dog. America is still the empire in the world. And I want to go back to something you mentioned before, and I think this it's a very interesting conversation about who's in charge. Is it the AIPAC or the Zionist Israeli lobby in America, or is it the empire? And I would believe that theory that AIPAC is in charge. If America, before the establishment of Israel, or before America became engaged into supporting Israel, was such an amazing empire that AIPAC just ruined it. Let's take, for example, what did America do in Japan? They hit it with the nuclear power. What did America do in Vietnam? What did America do in Korea? What did America do in Latin America? What did America do around the world? America killed millions of people in Afghanistan, Iraq, and even Somalia. He killed people. In Latin America, they destroyed Latin America. How many coups did America stage against democratically elected leaders in Latin America? Because they don't want them to have independence. Because when you have national independence and you have national liberation, then American interest in the region will be decreased. What did they do against the prime minister who was elected in 1953, Mossadegh, in Iran? the America and the British staged the coup against him. If all of this history of American empire not being evil into destroying the world and killing millions of people, then I would believe that AIPAC is the problem. But the problem is the support in Israel is not unique, and it's not different, and it's not far from what America has been doing around the world. As a matter of fact, what Israel is doing in America matches very much everything that what Israel has been doing in Palestine, matches everything that America has been doing around the world. So we can't keep, ignoring the fact that America has been a destructive force around the world. That's just the reality. Now, the issue with AIPAC is that people misunderstand how lobbying works in the U.S. And the reason why I want to say this, there's how many Chinese Americans are in America? Millions. How come there is no Chinese lobby in America? If it's just about Chinese are very solid community, they've built companies, they're very well advanced in their careers, they have economic strength, the prosperity, they're in major corporations and major companies and institutions and establishments, they're everywhere. How come there's no Chinese lobby in America that lobbies in favor of China? They have no problem with money, they have no problem with resources, and they are assimilated and integrated into the American fabric that they can make an impact, right? But the reality is, lobbying is America is only allowed in things that are in favor of the empire itself. That's why Saudis and Arabs and Palestinians will never be able to lobby against what America is doing in the Middle East, because they can have all the money that they want. But the problem is they can't change the politics of the empire, because if you change the politics of the empire in that region, then you will weaken the empire. So lobbying has to be in favor. Now, the reason why Zionists make so much impact and people think that their lobbying impact is so powerful that sometimes misunderstanding as controlling the country is because as I mentioned, when the lobbying is in favor of the empire, the empire has no problem with lobbying, right?
Yeah, but Roger,
the lobbying,
if I can pause you for a second.
Sure.
Because what it sounds like you're saying is that Israel doesn't really have to lobby all that hard because they naturally fit into the U.S.'s imperial ambitions.
Absolutely.
But if that was the case, they wouldn't be investing $100 million a year every single election cycle to lobby and to bribe. If they naturally fit in, they wouldn't have to spend a single penny.
Because they want to make sure that this support of the empire doesn't cease to exist. And to them, they want to make sure that it's built within the society at large.
So you're saying it's both. It fits in naturally.
Absolutely.
But this is just icing on the cake to make sure that this never changes.
100%. Like if think about it this way, if America allows Israel to function within a specific framework, like when it comes to Iran, it's very evident that Israel has been wanting to hit Iran and to stop Iran from getting a nuclear power for decades now. It's very, very evident. And if you remember years ago, even during Obama's time, AIPAC has been or was producing content nonstop about Iran and nuclear power and the evil state of Iran and what they do in the region, demonizing it nonstop. Not one American president has fallen for that lobbying. As a matter of fact, Obama and Biden tried to come up with a deal with Iran. If Israeli lobbying is this impactful, how come America did not hit Iran until today?
They didn't hit Iran, but they hit Iraq right before them.
So Iraq had nothing to do with Iran.
No, but they were an Israeli enemy.
Correct.
So there were many nations prior that the U.S. either directly invaded or meddled with indirectly. A lot of people argue Syria is one of them, Libya. So there's a long list of countries that have been named in the Pentagon of countries they want to take out.
Yes.
That Netanyahu himself is in Congress saying, yeah, take out this country.
Because Netanyahu at the end of the day, he lived in the U.S. He knows how America functions. But at the end of the day, and Israel likes to take credit for things that to feel like they're more powerful than they are in that regard. But at the end of the day, America did not invade Iraq because of the lobbying of AIPAC.
I agree. And
now, hold on. Does that mean that Israel doesn't benefit from the invading of Iraq? Of course they do. It's a mutual benefit for both parties. But America chooses not to listen to the lobbying of Israel when it comes, or Zionism when it comes to Iran, because to them the return or the pros and cons analysis is not in the benefit of the empire, and they would rather not take that risk right now. Because Israeli lobbying, as I mentioned, for the past 20 years has been in favor of hitting Iran and hitting Iran hard. Even Netanyahu was talking about hitting Iran before Trump came to power, and he's been theorizing about hitting Iran since October 7. Trump undermined that. He made it clear that he's not about that life, right?
But we don't know that yet. So
of course we don't.
I want to go back a little earlier, because you may have, perhaps either you misunderstood me or I miscommunicated it, but you were talking about how the U.S. prior to Israeli lobbying and prior of the establishment of the Israeli state committed all these evil acts around the world. I'm not trying to say that AIPAC or the Israel lobby is responsible for the U.S. acting in an imperial fashion. No. What I'm saying is that Israel has been leveraging their position as beneficial to the U.S.'s interest in the region, but over time have begun to change the power dynamic and leverage these positions and take over these positions of decision making in the United States over time. And now we're at a point where they're making the U.S. act against its own interests. And for example, the Iraq War is a great example, because if the strategy is to keep the Middle Eastern countries equally powerful enough and against one another, Iraq was very important to containing Iran. The U.S. destroying Iraq undermined their own interests in the region by making Iran much bigger and more powerful than they had ever been, and they unleashed Iran into the region that threatened Saudi Arabia, their other important ally. So it's completely counterintuitive. So I'm not saying Israel is why the U.S. did it. There are neocons and there's a lot of other factors, but these neocons that are behind a lot of the wars are also married very closely to Judeo-Christian values. Pete Hegseth, the new head of the Department of Defense, or he's the Secretary of Defense. If you hear this guy talk, he's an Israeli first. I mean, he talks openly. I hope my sons die fighting for Israel.
Look, you brought up really good points. Iraq is the example of Iraq. As I mentioned, is actually an example that the U.S. is not invincible, meaning that they calculated that they want to get rid of Saddam because Saddam got out of hand, right? And they were worried about him and worried about the strength that he had in that region, but they did not calculate that eventually that will end up helping Iran more than they helped them in the region. For sure, it's a miscalculation in their end.
But how could they even make that miscalculation?
Because they're not gods. They're not invincible. That's the whole point, and this is exactly what I was saying at the beginning, and this is what the resistance believe in, that the West and these empires are not invincible. They make mistakes, they do calculations, but they're not the only actors in the region, and this is why they want to.
But this is not a calculation where it's like, oh, I couldn't foresee it. Like, this was a domino effect, and somewhere on the other side of the region, this happened because this was right next door.
Correct, but they did not speculate everything. They can't speculate everything. They can't plan for everything. They also did not maybe think that Iran will change its policy strategies in the region. They did not think about Al-Qaeda rising there and ISIS and the resistance in Iraq and the people resisting against the Israeli American invasion and occupation of Iraq. There's so many factors, and again, even if they calculate for every single thing, there are actors in the regions that they also have their own game, and they also have their own strategies, and they also have their own politics and their own tactics that they also want to navigate and play around. So America is not invincible. Yes, is the strongest empire on the face of earth, but it's not invincible. Israel is not invincible, and we've seen it in Gaza for the past 15 months. Israeli analysts are going nuts in the past couple of weeks when they see the show of strength by Hamas and the coming out of these Toyota pickup trucks. All of them are they look brand new and clean, and they go nuts. Like, we destroyed Gaza. Where did these trucks come from? We were not able to destroy Hamas. So they're not invincible. They can destroy, but at the end of the day, there are other actors in the region that they play a game as well. But to go back to the point that you mentioned, I agree with one point, with the first part of your statement, which is definitely Israel is looking to be a little bit more independent from the U.S. There's no question about it. I mean, they would be stupid to, or idiots to not plan that maybe one day America will not care too much about us. Then we need to be self-dependent. 100%. At least this is definitely should be a national strategy for them. Now, is it easy? Absolutely not. It's not easy to be in the middle of a region that doesn't want you to be there, and everybody is, in their perspective, everybody's out to get them. It's not easy for them to be independent. However, it's in the best interest of America for Israel to be superior in the region and for Israel to continue to curb all of the aspirations for liberation and freedom and dignity in the region. So I definitely disagree that Israel now is leading America against its strategy. It's on the opposite direction. What's happening in Gaza, or what happened in Gaza specifically about the genocide, it's in the best interest of America, because America, and let's take a step back a little bit. America's focus since Obama has been China, and Obama and Biden they tried to, I don't want to say liquidate the Palestinian code, but put it on pause for a while so they can focus on China by giving Israel more power. Tell them, listen, just control the region for us. We want to go to China because China is a future threat for us, right? One of the biggest issues for America was to create the corridor, the economic corridor between India to Europe, right? Because in their perspective, one way of undermining China is to empower India, right? And this is why there's a lot of investment in India. To bring in that economic corridor between India, UAE, Saudi, Jordan, Israel, and all the way to Europe. Now, if Israel is not stable, and if Gaza continues to bring in problems and headaches in the perception of the United States and Israel, then that corridor plan will never succeed. Because if Israel is constantly closing down and airplanes cannot run and trucks cannot stop and the borders are closed, then that economic corridor between India to Europe is challenged. That means...
But it doesn't have to exit through Haifa.
But in their perspective, it's important to exit through Haifa because that also empowers Israel. It also helps normalizing the relationship. There's so many political and economic reasons, because the only way for them is to exit through Haifa, because otherwise you can't go through Lebanon, you can't go through Syria, you can't go through Turkey. The only reasonable thing for them, geographically speaking, besides the normalization or ideology, is
they can go through Saudi and they can exit and go through the Suez Canal.
But that's the problem. They don't want to go through the Suez Canal. They don't want to be dependent on the Suez Canal, because Israel itself has been, and this is very well known, is interested in undermining the Suez Canal, right? And they want to create their land by becoming more of an economic player more than just a military player. So the U.S. saw Gaza as a problem for them, because it means the region will continue to be destabilized if Gaza continues to be, not just resilient, but to be continuously
harassing, whatever interests they have.
Yeah, they're not quote unquote, they're misbehaving, and that challenges their plan to undermine China. And this is one of the reasons why Biden went crazy, and he mentioned this at the very beginning when he talked about the Abraham agreements, and also talked about the economic corridor with China. So America are wanted to get rid of Gaza once and for all, because they want to stabilize the region and call it quits and just focus on China. So I disagree with you with that. Israel is bringing in, and let's take, for example, even the body language of Netanyahu when he went to Biden. Many people called it like the Big Bear moment, where Netanyahu wanted Biden to hug him after October 7th to make him feel that it's okay, everything will be okay, as if he's his child. So the relationship between Israel and America is completely dependent on America. Now, the lobby has impact 100% because they are part of the problem. And I want to also mention something is important here when it comes to conspiracy theories. And this is not about you, of course. This is something that we hear all the time. One problem that we have, and it's something a lot of people need to understand, is that, and there's a book about this called, I think it was labeled When Jews Became White Folks, that talk about how, Jews, after they immigrated from Europe, specifically Zionists, and they lived in America and get assimilated, they accepted, and this is very common specifically after Zionism, because Zionism, Herzl, when he spoke or he messaged Chamberlain, who was you can think of him as the Secretary of State, he told him, I'm inviting you for something colonial. And he told him that Israel will be a rampart between barbarism in a global south and civilization in Europe. So Israel, from the very beginning, accepted and embraced European colonialism and European imperialism. So they are part and parcel of the empire. And let me ask you another question. Do you think, and our community had this issue a lot in the past few years, do you think that America would see a problem if there are a lot of Muslims who became part of the Pentagon and part of the system, if they are in favor of American hegemony? They see it as diversity. So just because American Jews who are Zionists are part of the establishment, it doesn't mean that they are in control of it, but that means they are aligned with it. And as a fact of the matter, they became pioneers in that empire. So their identity is not something that we should be looked at. We should look at them being American pawns within the system itself. They are part of the system. They're not foreigners from the systems. And I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned something very important. The concept of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Crusaders that took place 1,000 years ago, Zionists have nothing to do with it, had nothing to do with it. So why did they invade Jerusalem? Why do what are they called? The Christians in America, the in favor of Israel being established. The evangelical. There's the end of time myths that they have that Israel has to be established. So they're also in favor of Israel being created for their own nonsense, right? So this concept exists even go back in time in 1492. There has been reported and it's been known that in the diaries of Columbus, he did say that his goal was to go to America, collect gold, so he can carry on not a trip. What did he call it? I forget the exact words that he used, but more of like going and invading the Holy Land. So even Columbus, when he so-called discovered America and committed genocide against the natives, his mental model was to go to the New World, bring in gold, go back home. Which,
by the way, speaking of conspiracies, there's a very strong historical argument that CNN even shared an article about, that Columbus was actually Jewish.
I don't like conspiracy theories. I like that Columbus.
But there's very strong evidence that he was an undercover secret Jew hiding his faith because of the what's the name of this event?
The Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. But to me, what matters is not the religion of the people, because look, let's talk about something very honestly. Hold on, this is important. Go ahead. Jews in Europe were persecuted for hundreds of years, right? All of this nonsense about the conspiracy theories about Jews being ruining the societies and all of that nonsense was used as a way to demonize Jews, to persecute them and commit ethnic cleansing against them. Europeans persecuted and oppressed Jews for hundreds of years, whether it was in Andalus in southern Spain, and as a result we saw the Spanish Inquisition, or all the way in Europe with the attacks on the Jews throughout history in Europe. So Jews were victims of European racism. As a matter of fact, and this is very well documented, and someone like Joseph Mas'ad talks about in his work on Palestine, is that Jews became a problem for Europe. And if you want to go back to 1492, the concept of the purity of blood, that the Catholic Church wanted to get rid of the Jews and the Muslims. They have a problem with them because in order for you to be a pure European, you have to be white Catholic, right? Europe since then has been oppressing the Jews because they saw them as not purely Europeans, they're not Christian, and they're ones we need to get rid of them. So to Joseph Mas'ad and to many people who study that history, Europe, one of the main reasons they supported Zionism is because it kills two birds in one stone. It gets rid of the Jewish problem or the Jewish question. It exports the Jews out of Europe and turn them into colonial agents in Palestine, according to what Herzl was talking about before. So at the end of the day, it's not that Jews and the Zionists forced Europe to support them. Europe saw an opportunity to get rid of Jews from Europe but also turn them into colonial agents in the region to help their colonial aspirations in the region. So this rhetoric and this conspiracy theories that even exist in today, where so-called Jews run America, all of these nonsense, these conspiracy theories have anti-Semitic tropes and legacies from Europe.
Yes, but we're not talking about Jews controlling all of America.
Understand.
We're talking about a lobby that's very well funded, well organized, and we have to be real about the fact this. It's not an anti-Semitic trope or engaging in anti-Semitism to legitimately look at the power structures, the Biden administration, the Pentagon. You talked about how they would accept Muslims in the Pentagon because of diversity. You don't see Muslims in the positions you see Zionist Jews in.
But that's exactly my point. Many of the Zionist Jews have accepted that they are part of the imperial world, and as such, acting accordingly. If Muslims tomorrow...
Yes, but they do so with dual loyalties. Like
they don't need to have dual...
But they do. You're right. Why? They don't need to, but they do. They are Zionist Jews in America. Ben Shapiro himself said, I would love for Netanyahu to lead the United States of America. There are Jews in America Israel comes for them first.
It's not about Israel comes
and they
first.
say this openly. Like, there is a dual loyalty. I'm not saying they control all of America. What America does in other corners of the world, the Zionists don't pull the strings on that. But I'm saying the Zionists have they've made themselves useful tools and assets, and as for that reason have had doors open for them that have given them greater access. They've deeply infiltrated these systems of control in the government, and they're able to leverage that to benefit this entity that they have another loyalty to. And
I completely disagree with that for many reasons. Let's take one example of some people say, like, the gatekeeping of media, for example. Do you know why, historically speaking, Jews in America have, ended up working in media or become teachers and whatnot? Because when Jews came to America, when they first immigrated in America, they were persecuted, right? There was a lot of racism against them. They were not allowed to work in places where white people work, right? And this is a reminder of us that any newcomers that come to America have always been facing discrimination. So the only opportunity for them to work in were like teaching and work in the media. So that grew up with them. That grew with their generations and grew up with their communities. So it's not that they planted it in the 30s and the 20s that, you know what, in 100 years, the media will be powerful, so let's start from now. This is where they ended up being. But what's most important, again, and this is something we have to understand, Israel to the West is considered to be an extension of the West. It's considered to be the frontier of European colonialism and imperialism. Think about it, how South Africa used to be considered, right, back in the day, right? When it used to be considered the frontier of so-called Great Britain, when so-called Great Britain colonized India. These are the colonies, the former colonies that these Western colonial powers needed for their own empires to succeed. With the decolonization world and the independence era in the last century, that was not possible anymore. To replace it, you need another extension of the West that does your dirty work in the region, and that is Israel. America, and this is something very important. I know Israel has nothing to do, and the lobby has nothing to do with Vietnam and Korea, but the point I mentioned this is that the politics of America has always been about the hegemony in these regions and causing chaos. They don't need the Israeli lobby and the Zionist lobby to tell them to create more chaos in the region.
No, I agree, and I don't even think they need Israel to create chaos in the region. That's my point.
They do, because they don't. Who else is going to create chaos in the region?
I mean, you pointed it out. They partnered with Saudi Arabia, and they presented Iran as the Shia enemies of the Sunnis.
Correct, but
if you have seen any argument, any discussion, I want you to sit down Sunni Muslims from Syria with Shia Muslims from Lebanon and Iran and Turkey and have them have a conversation. There are a million ways to cut the pie and pit them against each other and have them kill each other. And if the U.S. wants to do business with any of them, they could. I don't think Israel needs to exist for the U.S. Like, does the U.S. have any colonizing states in other parts of the world similar to Israel that makes their work possible and what they do in Asia or what they do in Latin America? No, it's only in the Middle East. And I don't think Israel's necessary to divide the Middle East. I think there's a million ways to do it.
So
Israel did not exist for thousands of years, yet there were how many different empires in the Middle East that were pitted against one another? And you mentioned the Crusaders. Israel didn't even exist. The Crusaders came and they conquered Jerusalem. And how did they do so? Because all the different kingdoms were unwilling to coordinate with one another because they were more threatened by each other than they were by the Crusaders. And that allowed for their establishment and their existence. So I don't think Israel, and this is another thing I wanted to bring up, but we've come across it naturally now, organically through the conversation. I don't think Israel is truly that important to U.S. interests in the region. I think they can accomplish them in a completely different way. You use the example of the India trade corridor that goes from India to the UAE, through Saudi Arabia, up through Jordan, into Israel, and out of Haifa. And you said that Gaza, it's important for Gaza to be, the resistance to be squashed in order to establish stability. Well, what's the best way to produce stability in the region? Is it to ethnically cleanse and create genocide in Gaza with all this expense and chaos that could undermine the allies in the region? Or is it easier to just force Israel to agree to a peace deal and allow for the existence of Palestine? So I think this is why I say that there are other ways to do it, and Israel is preventing the U.S. from doing things that are actually in their interests, that are easier for them. And they're able to accomplish that. And it's not just by money through their investment. There is a lot of propaganda. We talk about Judeo-Christian values. A lot of information is coming about how this is a newly invented term in the last century. Judeo-Christian values was never a thing. It became a thing. If you look at the Google trend, the existence of the word and the amount of usage, it's only in the last 100 years.
Sure.
And so they have propagated this message within the religion, within the culture, within the politicians. And now you have this generation that grew up under that, not just receiving bribes, basically through campaign contributions, but Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and these other guys actually truly believe in their heart of hearts that, yes, Israel is so important to our interests when they're not. I think this is a Zionist concoction. And it's not to present Israel as so powerful and omnipotent, but they are very good at what they do. And they've been planning this for a very long time. And I think, to use the example of Catan, playing the game, they have 9 points. You ever played Catan?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, maybe we'll play Catan tonight. But for those listening, they know what I'm talking about, Catan. In Catan, basically, it's a board game, and you try to get 10 points by establishing roads and connecting your settlements. And whoever gets 10 points first wins. And what always happens in Catan is at some point, someone comes ahead too early. And everyone looks at them and says, he has 4 points, he's going to win. So everyone conspires to stop him from winning. And then someone else ends up winning. Israel has 9 points on the board. And they are about to establish themselves as the hegemon in the region and win the Catan board game. And everyone else is still not paying attention to it or noticing that fact.
Look, I get what you're saying, but just to unpack a few things. Okay, so when we talk about the lobby, let's start with the lobby. So America started paying attention to Israel after the 50s and the 60s, specifically after the 56 war and the 67 war. And this is where America started supporting Israel. At that time, the lobby was very weak. Israel, and I quoted you before, the Senator Jackson, who talked about the importance of Israel and Shah Iran to be the guardians of the region. So since the 70s and the 60s and the 80s and the 90s, the lobby was not as strong as today. Yet America wanted and continued to support Israel. Again, Israel is very much needed for the empire in the region for the following reasons. Number one, America and the Europe in general are extremely racist against the global South. Meaning, it's one thing to follow the Crusaders' models, or the Crusaders' model of divide and conquer, but at the end of the day, there was a Salah ad-Din who united the Muslims and freed Palestine from the Crusaders. And they know throughout history that these Muslims, and if anybody who reads history, they're not united, then they get united, and they get divided, and then they get united. But eventually there's something between them all that they all share, that you can't divide them for too long. there's Islam between them, there's ethnicity, there's religion, there's a language between them, a common language in the region that is very hard to divide these people for too long. And even if you divide them through the leaders, eventually these people will fall together. Now,
can I pause you and ask you a specific question about what you just said? What example is there of the Middle East uniting? You said you used the term Salahuddin united the region. He didn't really unite the region. He conquered the region.
sure.
He became the hegemon in the region temporarily, but he conquered the region.
Sure.
He didn't express an idea and everyone said, I wish this would be the case.
Because there were tyrants.
But
who were
historically,
stopping.
this has never been the case. When the
No, I
Ottomans
get what you're saying.
united the region, they never did so through some lofty ideals. We're all Muslims. Let's create a system in which we all benefit. That did not happen. They conquered everyone, and everyone accepted their power and submitted to it.
Because we have to differentiate here between, I get what you're saying, but there's a difference between conquering collaborator regimes versus the people. There was no conquest of the people themselves. The people themselves are for the meta ideas of unity, for the meta ideas of free and Palestine, for the meta ideas of being a Muslim ummah. What's stopping that from happening are these tyrant regimes that are stopping the unity from happening. So what Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi did was get rid of these regimes, and then everybody else was in favor. Now, the Ottoman Empire, with all of their issues, right? At the end of the day, people looked at them as a legitimate Muslim Khilafah, that they were representing them. At the end of its life, because of the issues of Europe, colonialism, and trying to catch up with, there's so many reasons why it collapsed eventually, and they start being more regressive. But in the early days, people were happy because it's a Muslim ummah together. Now, but what's most important here, and it goes back to my point about European colonialism and bringing in Columbus and Spanish Inquisition and the so-called purity of blood and persecution against Jews in Europe. Europeans don't see us as equal human beings. That's just the reality. And the sooner people accept that reality, the sooner it becomes for us to know how to truly come together to be able to push back against European and American hegemony and imperialism. They don't see us as equal human beings. Look at what's happening in Gaza. 60,000 people were slaughtered. 20,000 children were massacred. Nobody talks about them. Nobody even knows one name of them. Yet, when one Israeli child dies, the whole world talks about it. Now, of course, there's a propaganda part of it to demonize Palestinians and to continue to fund the genocide. But the truth of the matter is that brown people and the people from the global south are not looked at equally. And to draw this image, and people can say, you know what, no, because we are at war with them. Okay, what about black people in this country? What about Japanese and Chinese and the Mexicans and the Italians and the Irish who came to America, were persecuted? Black people until today, even though slavery ended, over 100 years ago, until now, they have not been paid reparations. Their issues have not been solved. Police brutality exists until today. And when black men are shot in the street execution style, nobody talks about them. But imagine if the same thing happened to a white guy, the whole world will talk about it. So again, the West also don't see us equally. And as I mentioned before, Herzl knew that. And that's why he went to Chamberlain and to European superpowers and told them, we can be your vanguards in the region. Weizmann literally told British leaders that we will be we will be loyal to the British Empire.
Right.
Use us. So the point I'm making is that at the end of the day, because of American interest and because of European interest, because of their history in persecution of the Jews, because of the Holocaust, that played a big role for the West into their consciousness that there's many factors. Number one, the end of time myths that exist in terms of creation of Israel and Messiah. There's the genocide and persecution guilt that exists within the West, right? There's the other concept of fixing the Jewish problem from Europe. There is the geopolitical needs for American Empire and the British Empire in the region. All of these things together had made Israel and Zionist Jews to be the perfect model for them, to help them carry on what they need to carry in the region. So it's not just about the interest, it's about the as you mentioned, the Zionists in this country and the lobbies, but all of these components together made them the perfect state. But at the end of the day today, Israel is seen as an extension of of European world. And to them, it's very important to maintain that extension for the many reasons that I mentioned. But at the end of the day, it's in the best interest of America to have a superior power in the region that will undermine everybody else and keep them in check. Because let's look at it this way. The King of Jordan, the the Sisi and Saudi and Libya and Morocco and Tunisia, all of these nations, they're kept in power based on their position when it comes to Israel. Why? Because it's very important for America to maintain that superiority of Israel so everybody is under check. Now, is there a battle for Israel to wanting, as we talked about before, to create a sense of independence? Yes. But the last 15 months have shown us that without the support of America, Israel will not have been able to last 1 month in the war.
They're not there yet, and I don't disagree with you, citing the historical support for Israel and the creation of Israel. I just mean that it's a different era now. Like you mentioned Theodore Herzl, this was nearly, 200 years ago at this point. More than 100 years ago. 120, 130. We're in a completely different era now. We're in a completely different world. I don't think Israel, I don't think it's about their existence or survival anymore. I think it's about their dominance. And they are dependent on the U.S. Yes, they're not there yet, but part of normalization, in my view, and I'm sorry that this became like the second half of the podcast. That wasn't my intent, but I think there's been a lot of great information that you've provided that the audience will benefit from, so I'm happy about that. But in my view, I think that normalization opens up the economy for Israeli businesses to then infiltrate even deeper and dominate the region and secure resources that they otherwise couldn't establish themselves. And I think having the U.S. either destroy Iran or force them to give up their nuclear program and change, which would change the Islamic regime of Iran, Islamic government of Iran, whatever you want to call it, that would change them entirely. If they basically give up their nuclear program and say we won't, develop a nuclear weapon, then they're basically putting to bed their principles of their revolution in a way, and they're accepting Israeli hegemony. So in my view, I think we've gone past the point of survival, and I think Israel is working towards becoming independent, and they do this by acquiring as much resources and wealth as possible and becoming self-sustainable within the region. And the way to do that is to make sure that no one can challenge their security, and that Saudi Arabia and other countries normalize with them fully and allow their corporations to do business.
I think your point of view is absolutely solid, and I definitely agree that Israel is trying to be as independent as possible. There's no question about it. As we mentioned the many reasons, and we talked about it thoroughly. But I beg to differ about Israel ever is capable or able to become a hegemon on their own or to become an empire for many reasons. Number one, geography is not in their interest. Them being located in the middle between many Arab countries and many people who are fighting for the liberation of Palestine, fighting for the struggle. It's a never-ending struggle. The population is small. Their per capita and their exports and imports, their economic system is also very dependent on the West. Literally, the West, if they cut down the investment of technology in the Israeli economy will collapse. So they're not even 100 years far from becoming an empire. It's all of these reasons, and the lack of security is the most important thing. What makes America very unique, and even Europe, but nobody can beat America, is America's far from the world. In order for you to come and invade America, you need days, and America would know everything about you, and they will destroy your armies in a heartbeat without you having an impact on them, right? Israel is in the middle of nowhere, in the midst of, think about it in their perspective, like they are in the midst of between enemy lines. So they will never be stable, because Israel as a settler colonial project, that's the whole idea, is about creating stability, creating security. As long as the Palestinians are breathing, Israel cannot have the stability that they want, because Palestinians want liberation, want freedom. So yes, on one hand, Israel wants to have a semi kind of independence from the West because they want to do their own politics 100%. Like, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that Israel is a client state in its totality, meaning they cannot do anything without the permission of the US. I'm saying that Israel has evolved from being a client state, as I mentioned earlier, and as that Australian scholar said, they become like more of a sub-imperialist power where they are reliant on the West, but they have room to maneuver. But the point I'm making is that it's in the best interest of America for Israel to continue to be superior in the region, and the lobby in America, yes, it has impact, but that impact is contained within the framework that is allowed. The moment Israel is not beneficial to American interests, that lobby will become irrelevant. They will literally make rules and declarations and bills that will undermine lobbying and will destroy them. Like Israel, as long as Israel is able to maneuver because America wants it to maneuver because it's benefiting its interest. And I don't imagine the U.S. will stop looking at Israel as beneficiary to their interest in the region unless. It's very hard to, honestly speaking, I'm not trying to be negative, but it's very hard to imagine that the U.S. anytime soon will think Israel brings more harm than benefit. Maintaining their hegemony in the region is very beneficial, and it doesn't cost them a lot.
I agree because the people in the U.S. government whose job it is to interpret whether it's in their interests are now Zionists.
I disagree with that. I think you're underestimating the power of the institutions in America. These people, these politicians are mouthpieces. They're not the ones who set the policies.
But on a deeper level, the institutions are made up of who?
The institutions are made of Americans who are in favor of the empire, regardless of their religion and ethnicity.
A significant number of them are pro-Israel Zionist Jewish Americans.
Do we have data about that?
There is data that I've been collecting and I'll be sharing. And this is not, dude, for a long time, I've been rejecting and I still reject, obviously, these anti-Semitic tropes. But a spade is a spade.
No, I disagree with you.
Did you know that 67 members of Biden's administration, there are 100 people.
So
67. What? So what? That's 7 out of 10 people are all pro-Israel.
Dude,
dual loyalties.
Okay, there is no such. Okay, America is pro-Israel. The Europe are pro-Israel. All of the Western world is pro-Israel, whether they're Jews or not. This concept that the only ones that are pro-Israel are Jews in these countries is ridiculous. Every single politician, everybody who works for the empire, everybody who is in these institutions is pro-Israel, not because it's a Jewish state. They're pro-Israel because it serves their interests. Now, if the Zionists in America are also benefiting, it's a win-win situation.
Right, but these politicians and these other people you're talking about who aren't Jewish, who support Israel, what do they describe it as? They do not say Israel's important to our... Okay. That's not the first thing they say, right? They say the Jewish state. Hold on, but you said they don't support it because it's a Jewish state.
But
it's the first thing they say.
But that's just populist stuff. What matters is I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Regardless of the Zionists that exist in America, regardless of AIPAC, do you think America will continue to support Israel whether the AIPAC exists or not for their own interest, given the history of America?
Let me hit you with a question.
No.
I'm going to answer your question with a question.
Okay.
Do I have permission to answer your question with a question?
Sure.
Do you think if Israel stopped existing, the U.S. would give up on their attempt to divide and conquer the Middle East?
They will find another client state.
They will find another client
but
state,
that's
which
my
means
point.
Israel does not need to exist for it to happen.
But then you have another Israel 2.0. So what are you trying to get at?
The difference, you don't have an Israel 2.0 because whoever the client state is from the Middle East. They live there. Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so you want UAE
the
or
Turks
Saudi
or Iran or somebody.
So what different? Like what? Okay, if UAE is a new client state and they do the dirty work like Israel, it's like. What's the difference? At the end of the day, it proves my point that America is interested in a client state in Egypt, whether it's Jews or Muslims or Christians. So that's literally my point.
Yeah, but the difference is one would actually be much more stable.
How? Okay, you can argue that.
Like
maybe
you said.
Hold on. You know what?
Because the people would accept that at least these people are Muslim.
I will concede that. Okay, but you see, this is my problem. You are trying to. I'm not saying you, but this argument.
Yeah, no, it is me. It's okay to say me.
Okay, if you're gonna claim
it's
no
okay.
problem.
Like if you think it's stupid,
this argument. No, I don't think it's stupid. But the argument says that instead of asking the U.S. to stop being evil and stop killing millions of people in the Middle East for their own hegemony and interest, to tell them that maybe instead of supporting Israel, we're willing to subjugate ourselves to you. Just choose another country instead of Israel. That argument literally sounds like that. The better argument would be Israel is a terrorist state that has been killing Palestinians for over 100 years, and America is an imperialist evil empire that needs to stop its hegemony in the region that caused the death of millions of people. Not that, please, America, we know you're evil as an empire, as an imperialist empire. Don't choose this client state that is oppressing us. Please choose another client state to oppress us. This is how it sounds like.
I think if we're dealing with, okay, if I want to propose to the United States to give up their support for Israel, I'm not going to try and convince them to see my humanity. As you said, they don't see us as equal human beings. Don't look at me as a human being. Look at me as a useful asset. Is it more beneficial for you to achieve your interests in the region to have this destabilizing state that ruins our lives and our economies for their own benefit? Or would you rather do business with us and we'll actually have proper stability in the region? Because
there's no doing business. You're going to be okay. You're literally saying that America, instead of shooting us, please poison us to our death. That's what you're literally doing. You're literally actually.
No, beggars can't be choosers. I'm not saying, oh, U.S., I like having you here. You're gonna be here regardless.
So
can you be here and not do business with the state of Israel?
Why are we focusing on the client?
No, we're not focusing on it
rather than the empire itself.
Because what is more realistically to be defeated? The client state,
because
the client state, or the U.S. empire? We will never defeat the U.S. empire.
Correct.
The U.S. empire defeats itself. We will never defeat it. Militarily, as you pointed out, 2 massive oceans protecting it. They have very advanced weaponry. We could talk about this briefly if you want. Ahmad and I were having a nice conversation about this yesterday. But the U.S. and China, the 2 leading superpowers, right now it's cute. Iran has these ballistic missiles, mashallah, that fly at hypersonic. And, mashallah, Egypt has a lot of tanks. And Turkey has an aircraft carrier that can fly some drones. Mashallah, progress, right? The U.S. is developing artificial intelligence. They're creating hardware and software that is designed to address 1 million problems with 1 million possible solutions at once within moments. And they're expanding this ability, and they're going to be able to simulate through this technology new methods within the world's physics, the physics of the universe, to develop new, more powerful, efficient weapons. We are on the cusp of a technological revolution that is going to see 1 billion times advancement. And obviously what receives that advancement first is the military. So we are not even competing in that as a region. We are destined to be subservient to them, or if not them, China or someone else, for the foreseeable future, until Muslims stop caring about what's your aqidah, bro, and Sunni Shia, until we start developing hardware chips in nanometers, okay, that does quantum computing to create the solutions that would defend us from those external forces. We're always going to be subservient. And so it's easier to align ourselves with the U.S. and say, hey, whatever you want in this region can be more easily achieved with less friction with us, as opposed to this settler colonial maniacal state that believes themselves narcissistically to be the superior race.
So you're literally like, America has been trying to subjugate the Arabs for 50, 60 years now.
Yeah.
You're just volunteering to subjugate yourselves.
Brother, we have been
the status quo.
We have no other option.
So I'm not comfortable with that. I'm gonna.
I know, Habibi, but
do
you have a G8 chip that you're working on?
Can we get a little bit preachy?
Yeah.
Islamically speaking? Okay.
Yes, let's go.
So let me ask you a question. Speaking all of this technological advancement and the world where it's going, this defeatist mindset that because of our material, what's the right word here? Materially, we're lower than the West and America.
Yes.
So we can't keep up. We can't defeat it. So might as well join it. And that's what Zionists did, by the way. But you're pushing us to repeat that cycle. But let's go back in time for Islam. What do we call the first 5 Khulafa? Khulafa al-Rashidin. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
What
I was going to guess, and I was going to be proud of myself for guessing because I'm very bad with this stuff.
I just made it easy.
One second. Ammar, can you just text Ace and Oak because it's 7:15 and tell them we're going to be late? Go ahead.
I touched it. Is it okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we talk about Khulafa al-Rashidun, the first caliphates in Islam. Now, if you compare their accomplishments materially in comparison to the Khulafa al-Umayyin, the Umayyin that came after them, which one accomplished more materially speaking, building civilizations. After them.
Those who came after.
Why do we as Muslims view the first ones, the first five, as the superior ones or the better ones in comparison to the ones who accomplished way more materially speaking?
Well, Islamically, because of their proximity to the Prophet, there's the belief that the first generation, the Sahabas, are
Why
the
is
best.
that? There's
Because
a main
of the-
component. I don't want to do a quiz here, but like
Okay.
the main component is that Khulafa al-Rashidun focused on the ethics versus the material building. Because Muslims don't believe in the concept of just material success. We don't believe in salvation. We don't believe in individual salvation. We believe in something called falah. Falah means the success in the hereafter, meaning that we live on this earth not to accumulate wealth and build success, materially speaking, but to live by the ethics that is given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe that that's our mission on life. So our mission is not to build the latest nanotechnology, and of course, I'm not undermining science, I'm not undermining technological advancement, it's important, but we don't look through the world through only material gains and through the concept of salvation as an ummah is if we build nanotechnology just like the West. Our salvation is, our falah is, do we live in an ethical way like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ask us to live by, even if it means undermining ourselves materially speaking. And that is the difference between us and the West. I don't want to get too philosophical, but the Western mindset is different than us because it comes from material perspective. It comes from the concept of modernity, the concept of secularism, that ethics and morality has no space in politics, has no space in business. Meaning that as long as the business is making you money, the means don't matter. In Islam, we believe that the objective doesn't justify the means. The goal doesn't justify the means. الغاية لا تبرر الوسيلة. And from a Western material perspective, everything justifies the means because that your end goal is the success. So what you're prescribing in terms of going to the empire and tell the empire use me instead of Israel goes against everything we believe in as Muslims and goes against everything we believe in as the people from the global south, that our salvation is to end oppression because it's oppression and not because it's done on us. Meaning that we should be believing, and this is why we care about black issues. We care about issues in Africa and issues in the global south because we believe that oppression is bad even if it's done against anybody. But the mindset of going to America and tell America, look, Israel is bad, it's destroying us, but it's also ruining your image. I don't know how Israel is ruining America's image because America's image is way worse than America's image. And let's not begin about 1492 to the genocide, to the slavery, to the wars everywhere in the world. So, Israel is a small fish in the ocean of the crimes and the evilness of the American empire since 1492. But the point I'm making, going to America and tell them, use us instead of Israel, goes against everything we believe in. What we believe in is that, no, we need to stop America and Israel from oppressing our people and from ruining the region for their own national interest. What we should be aiming for...
But how do we prevent that?
Now, how we prevent that, that's a whole big conversation that starts with raising our people and our youth into realizing that Islam is about what I just mentioned. It's about justice. It's about freedom. It's about material success is not our end goal in life. Having a 9-to-5 job that pays you $1 million is not your goal in life. Sure, it's good to have. I'm not saying it's bad. You should be succeeding in your life as a Muslim and as an individual. But your goal is how do we make the world a better place? And as long as America continues to be the empire that it is, the world will never be in a better place. So,
but that's the nature of power, isn't it?
I understand
Can
the nature of
anyone,
power.
even a Muslim, a rightly guided Khalifa, could not achieve power without committing some kind of crime?
No,
in this
not
dunya,
necessarily.
In this dunya, you
don't
want to
have to
achieve
commit
power,
crimes.
you pick up the sword. You pick up the sword, somebody dies.
Hold on. There's a big difference between committing a crime and using hard power. There's nothing wrong with having hard power. There's nothing wrong with technologically advance yourself and building military to defend yourselves and protecting the world. Absolutely, that's necessary. Even so-called international law that is built to protect European powers and their interest in the region. But even according to international law, people who are under occupation are justified and allowed to resist themselves and engaging in armed resistance. So that's not the problem. The problem is that do we normalize and negotiate with the devil, which is American imperialism in order to only save Palestinians at the expense of other people. And that's something I'm not comfortable with. Now, the other alternative you can think of, and you literally can...
This is what everyone on the planet does.
But
I'm not
we don't
saying
have to
other
do
people
that.
don't matter, but I think this idea that we have to save everyone is an impossible task that can never be achieved.
It's not impossible. It starts with us fighting for our own small struggles. If we are able to free Palestine without becoming another client set for America, that's a huge success.
But we don't have any choice. Like we live in the real world. What you've professed, what you've talked about, what you described as preaching, I think these are important values and ideals, and there's nothing wrong with them. But in the real world, they have to they bend in order to achieve real things. And in the region, the U.S. is there whether you like it or not. It's not, oh, do I choose to make the deal with the devil? It's, I have only these choices, ultimately, unless somehow the people of the region, the Middle East, can rise. You know, like, I understand materialism isn't the only thing that matters, but materialism does still matter.
Of course.
And if we want to bring about these ideas into the real world and enforce them to some extent, the U.S. has enforced their own values. The U.S. is an empire that's committed a lot of crimes. The U.S. has also done a lot of good. This is just objective.
Debatable, for sure.
They've done some good, you acknowledge, and a lot of good you can argue in different ways. But the point is not to just gloss over their crimes and say it's okay, you did some good. But there is no truly good or truly evil entity. There's a combination of the two.
If you wanna materialism is important, and material analysis is important, and understanding the world from a material perspective is also important. And this is how we get to the point of where we are today, understanding how do we cope and deal with the world. But as a Muslim, I'm not comfortable justifying oppression for my own salvation. As a Muslim, I believe that Allah has asked us to do the work and not worry about results. And the story of Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam is the biggest story, right? Yes. When he started worrying about the results, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him a lesson by what? By having a whale swallow him. Why did the whale swallow Sayyidina Yunus? Because he got frustrated, right? He got frustrated that nobody believes in him. Right? Allah wanted to teach him a lesson, right? I mean, with all due respect to our Prophet alayhi salam. But the concept is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him directly, listen, it's not your business about the results. The results come from me. Your job is to obey what I told you to obey and to do what I ask you to do. So we as Muslims believe that we are commanded to bring about justice to the world at our own expense. Now, do we see the...
But we haven't done that.
The people of Gaza and the people in Palestine have been doing it under... Like, if you think about it this way, all of the technological advancement of Israel and America, like, most people think they are invincible. But the fact that October 7th happened, and the fact that happened from a region that has been under blockade for the past 19 years, yet it happened, it shows you that these guys are not invincible.
I agree.
That shows you
not,
that this concept...
Not,
exactly. What the Muslims
but
just...
they are incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And
I think
undermining that power
the neighbors
is
were
foolish.
afraid. I think the reason why it wasn't even an idea in the minds of Jordan or Egypt or anyone else is not just because they've already normalized with them for many years, but it's also because they understand
Absolutely.
We are no match militarily.
Undermining them is foolish. I agree with you. But at the end of the day, we don't give up. At the end of the day, we shouldn't stand up for what is right.
I agree. Look, I think it's very well said and it's important. I'm not asking people to sacrifice or abandon morals or ethics, but I think there's a middle ground.
But there's pragmatism, yes.
There's a middle ground. There's pragmatism. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was one of the most pragmatic leaders. He's one of the reasons why he had so much success is that he was a brilliant politician as well. He understood how to make deals even with his enemy and bring people together and at the core of making deals is focusing on incentivizing everyone involved. Because we're human beings. We're driven by human nature. Even if we have these lofty ideals, we are driven more by our own interests and needs. And so the U.S. is the most powerful empire, and they're here, whether we like it or not. So if they're going to be here, can they be here in a way that is more beneficial for us? And they don't prevent us from practicing our deen. You fast, you pray, you pay zakat, you do all the other things that you have to do as a Muslim to accomplish your 5 pillars. And beyond that, politically, if you want to assert yourself, of course, then you come into conflict with the United States. I believe there is potential for the United States to assert itself in the Middle East without the existence of the state of Israel. And I believe at this moment in time, Israel has now, through its lobby and these dual loyalist, Zionist Jewish Americans, they have gained enough influence and leverage in the political system and the decision-making process in the United States where they are in the position to actually interpret what is in the U.S.'s interest, and they've undermined it. Now they are making decisions that they present as being beneficial to both the United States and Israel, but in reality, it's more beneficial to Israel. And the U.S. is so powerful and wealthy that the people, congressmen, many of them still don't understand how it's actually undermining their interests in the region.
No, I don't agree with you there. For the many reasons we mentioned, but yes, we should not be purists in a sense of either our way or the highway. We should definitely there needs to be a level of pragmatism in terms of how we deal with politics, especially in these major issues. And I think the issue of Hamas and Iran, even though Iran was involved in Syria, is a level of pragmatism that Hamas felt that it's an existential need for it to get the support that they need, whether from whoever it came from. But there's a big difference between being pragmatic and selling out your principles. The principles of collaborating and becoming the client state of the empire that is destroying the world. That is not pragmatism. That's replacing, a client state with another client state. And of course, we already discussed this many times already, but for many reasons that I already provided, but definitely don't think that these politicians and institutions in America are naive enough to allow the lobby to dictate the policies of the U.S. The policies of the U.S. are concluded by research, by institutions, by establishments, by deep state, by bureaucrats, by people who spent all their life discussing and running calculations and mathematical equations and running through history and ideology to see what policies work for America, what policies doesn't work for America. To claim that AIPAC, by running their festival and parade every year, saying that we have this much impact on Congress is just laughable. Now, laughable.
I agree, but everything you said, I think, is made up of people at the end of the day, and these people have increasingly become Zionist Jewish Americans. They have taken these positions, and they are the ones doing the research and writing the reports.
Again, we're ignoring that. We're bypassing the reality that America wants that client state to exist in the region. As long as it needs Israel, of course Israel is going to have leverage and is going to get things. It's going to get more than what America is willing to give it. That's normal. But the problem is not that the lobby is exploiting the leverage that they have. The problem is that why do they have leverage to begin with, and that leverage is given to them because of the need of the U.S. empire of a client state in the region. So we are trying to make sense of why the client state has leverage, which is, in my opinion, is not the main problem. The main problem is why is there a need to have a client state for America? Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. If America had such a wonderful history before the lobby, then I agree with you 100%. Then the lobby is controlling.
I think both things. You don't have to agree with me.
Yeah.
I think both things are potentially true. I think definitely it started off that way, but I think over time it's moved a little more in their favor. But because we've been talking for almost 3 hours now, mashallah.
Oh, wow.
This is the only podcast where it's flown by, and I want it to keep going. 3 hours. I love all the other people I spoke to, but I could talk to you for 10 hours straight.
I appreciate it.
I've learned so much. I feel bad for Ammar. I'm sure you're benefiting too, but sitting here for 3 hours, you're probably like, yeah. Okay, so I had other questions, but I need to skip them. So I'm going to ask you one last question. And you have to promise to come back so we do this again, and inshallah I'll get to ask these other questions.
Sure.
Okay. You sure? Because it took a long time to get you here, bro. It took 3 months to book a ticket for you to get here. So I want you to come back, inshallah. But okay. So let's end on a positive note, because I've injected a lot of pessimism and defeatism. And I understand, sometimes I'm too realist, and that doesn't mean I think I'm right. I acknowledge I could be totally wrong.
I'm a realist too, I understand. Yeah, agree.
So sometimes I can come across very defeatist. So I want to talk now in a positive way. I was hoping that you could criticize the Palestine movement in America, but because we need to end on a positive note, we will focus on the good and what people can do. People listening, understanding that things are out of our control, potentially Israel will return after phase 1 or 2 of the hostage deal and the ceasefire? Uh-oh.
This thing stopped.
When?
We're at 2:56.
Okay.
So maybe just a few minutes.
Yeah, it's been like 5 minutes. Why did it stop?
I don't know. It was just flashing. It's going again.
It's going again?
Yeah. This one's still going.
That's why we need a third camera in the middle. Is it recording?
It's recording.
Okay. I don't think we've ever done 3 hours straight before.
Yeah, maybe it overheated. Sorry. Did I
No, it's
ruin-
not your fault at all. I'm the one who. We've probably been talking about whether Israel is becoming a hegemon for an hour and a half, and it's because of me, forcing you to keep talking about it.
It's
keep
going,
talking
but
about
maybe you want to wrap it up. Maybe the sensors. This is all 4K, right?
it. Yeah.
Maybe the sensor's overheating. So.
Okay, just keep an eye on it and let me know.
keep it
Okay, so final question. Let's end on a positive note. People watching, understanding that things are out of their control, and this is a generational struggle. Realistically, what can people do, and what should they keep doing in order to contribute in some way to bringing justice for the Palestinian people?
Yeah, this question has many layers to it. I think the most important thing is for people to learn more and educate themselves about history, about understanding how things work. And my biggest thing has always been, don't believe in conspiracy theories, believe in like actual material analysis. Now, it doesn't mean that, everything, like everything is visible, everything in the table. I'm just saying that the world is much simpler for us to believe in conspiracy theories. Sometimes things are very direct the way they are. You don't have to, people don't have, there doesn't need to be an invisible hand that controls things behind the scenes. It can be that very simple, that America is interested in this, or Israel is interested in that, or Elon Musk, like a lot of people say, for example, Elon Musk, the Mossad or the Zionists have something on him. But maybe it's very simple. Maybe just Musk is a scum who doesn't care and wants to make his own interest, and his interest aligns with Israel, and he's okay with it. We don't need to believe in conspiracy theories. So education and learning history is very important. Number two is understand that the battle in Palestine and the struggle in Gaza specifically it's truly a pedicent, it's the epicenter center or a microcosm of the struggles between Western colonial powers and Western imperialism against the rest of the world. This is a battle between good and evil. I'm not even exaggerating. I'm not trying to be populist, but this is a battle between a world that is trying to live through ethics and morality and a world that is trying to destroy the world for the sake of benefits and material benefits and super profits, and for multinational corporations to make more money. And Gaza represents that struggle between materialism and ethics and morality, because at the end of the day, Gazans are fighting with their bare hand for the sake of human dignity. Literally, that's all. Like Israel and the US are telling them, like, take money and leave and live your life. But because to them, money is not the only thing that drives them. What drives them is their ethics and morality and their attachment to the land, but most importantly, their human dignity, that they cannot be bought, they cannot be subjugated by other superpowers, versus America and European power, colonial powers, and Israel, the ones that all about super profits, even if it means killing 20,000 children in Gaza. It doesn't matter. So what matters is to see the struggle the way it is. It's beyond just Israel and Palestine. It's beyond just Hamas and Israel. It's about now a struggle between, justice, the axis of justice and the axis of little super profits. And we have to understand that. And if we understand that, then we situate ourselves with the struggle of Palestine and understand that, a replacement of a client state is not enough to end that struggle. We need to end the struggle at large. And that means not just education, but also, activism, mobilization, getting involved with organizations that are doing a lot of work for Palestine and doing a lot of work against, exploitation of people. We have to be conscious and ethical human beings. We have to care about our phones, being manufactured by, sweatshops in China and everywhere around the world, and understand that this exceptionalism that we feel, that we live in the West, and as long as I'm comfortable in my life, it doesn't matter at what cost. We have to be conscious about this. And once we change that mental model, we become better human beings, and we are capable of fighting evil on this earth. And finally, just get involved. I know a lot of people who, sacrificed a lot in their life, gave up their jobs, gave up a lot of opportunities for the sake of Palestine and for the sake of work. And I'm not asking everybody to do that, but at least take small time out of your life to give back to the community, help the cause as much as possible, and engage in organizations and campaigns and projects that, try to shake things up and try to, challenge the status quo to make this world a better place. And eventually, hopefully, we don't just end the misery in Gaza, but also liberate Palestine.
Inshallah. Sure. Very well said. Raja Abdulhaq, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on
my honor.
The Propaganda & Co. podcast. Thank you so much for being here and
thank you for having me.
Informing and educating our audience. So
thank you.
Love to have you again one day, inshallah.
Absolutely, inshallah. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Oh my God, I'm so exhausted.
I'm sorry I kept you going.
No, not at all. It was fun. Check the last photo.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. Also, if you'd like to support what we do, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on our website, where we post exclusive documentaries, podcasts, and videos just like this one about geopolitics, current events, and history. We built this website because of continued censorship of our videos, so please do consider becoming a member. Until next time.